Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto returned from another world stronger than ever? Kakashi finally saw the change. Part 3. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's start. Chio spat in front of Yura, her eyes glittering dangerously. I knew there had to be a traitor, I just didn't think it'd be someone as apparently loyal as you. I suppose it was you who prevented the alarms from being raised when Gaara was attacked. The man gave a soft nod. Yes. His eyes flickered back to Naruto, Kakashi, and Sakura. Naruto stood at the forefront of the group, his eyes smoldering with rage at the Sand Junin. The boy's fists were clenched and it looked for a moment that he wouldn't let the man continue standing so calmly in front of him. His arms twitched occasionally, as if he were about to suddenly grab for his weapon and rush at the man. How dare he? The moment the small word left Yura's burnished bronze lips, a hot fire had leapt up in Naruto's stomach. The baleful fury traveled up Naruto's body into his chest, seizing his heart and making it pump and rage with Naruto's labored, furious breaths. This man had the gall to simply admit it like that. What was wrong with him? He glared at the man with eyes that could have melted steel, noticing that Yura's expression never changed. The man obviously noticed Naruto's rage, for it was hard not to. The air burned with it, as if a hidden inferno had arisen around Naruto, blowing searing air in all directions, and Naruto's breaths were the most audible sound in the pristine silence of the clearing. However, Yura did not glare back, did not cower, nor did he smile triumphantly. He just stared back, as if curious, as if he couldn't possibly conceive of why Naruto had contorted his face so. As if the anger Naruto was showing to him was a foreign language. Chio noticed this, and frowned. This man, he was Yura, no doubt, but he did not act like it. She had met Yura several times in her life, mostly when she had been forced to accompany her brother, whose heart was far too soft, and accepted just about any request that was made to him to council meetings. The man had been polite, knowledgeable, and above all loyal to a fault to the sand. He had been one of Gaara's biggest supporters, when the young man became Kakashi. It was his loyalty, too, that had made Gaara appoint him as an advisor, only second to Baki. So why did he now stand here? HMPH, said Chio. You never seemed like the type who'd betray our village, Yura. The man shrugged. I couldn't say. That doesn't really matter, however, at this point. I have been ordered by my master to prevent you from going any further. That I will do, and nothing more. He lowered himself into a solid fighting stance, narrowing his profile but not lifting a finger to attack or prepare otherwise for offense. Rather, his movement seemed less a preparation, and more a signal. Or at least that was what Kakashi felt. A mere second before a kunai flew past his ear close enough for him to feel the ringing steel on his skin and the light fluttering of an explosive note as it whipped in the air behind the deadly triangular knife. It thudded into the ground a foot in front of the Junin, right behind Naruto, who had turned at the gasp from Sakura. Upon seeing it, all four of the team stared at the kunai and the glowing note, which was rapidly approaching the point where it would detonate. For a second which all felt still allowed them to memorize every slight detail of the deadly weapon, but a mere second later, they leapt with shinobi grace and speed away from it, just as the explosive note reached its end, and filled the air with a thundering boom and a flash of yellow light. Another one, Kakashi thought. At that moment Yura reacted. The former sand nin shot forwards with surprising speed, pulling a kunai from within his cloak and slashing at Chio, who had leapt closest to him. The old woman dodged back, lifting a dagger of her own to parry. Her eyes widened, however, when Yura's blade passed through her own as if it weren't there, slicing it in two. Yura thrust his shoulder into her using the same built-up force of his charge, and it struck Chio so hard that she was momentarily bereaved of breath. The force of the hit flung her backwards across the clearing, though despite her age she managed to recover sufficiently to land on her feet. She spat once again, noticing the red tinge to it this time. Such strength, she thought. Kakashi, as this happened, twisted in the direction the kunai had flown from. He caught for the briefest of moments a figure, dressed in the very same way as Yura, ducking away behind a tree. He raised a hand, and a second later there was a rustling within the trees, and the figure emerged again for a mere moment before vanishing into the forest. The once hidden presence of 4 others followed, made known by a low growl that echoed within the trees. Kurenai's team would handle it. But it still posed the question, how had he avoided their and Suabuki's attention? And how had Hinata's Byakugan missed him? Yura, after ejecting Chiyo from his range, twisted at the sight of a silver blur, Suabuki darting across the ground towards him, teeth bared. He raised his blade, preparing to meet her attack, but she suddenly stopped. From where he now stood, Naruto began a string of hand seals. Yaju Dagu. Suabuki puffed out her chest and bucked her head back for a single instant before bellowing out a sound greater than any roar Yura had heard, a sound of thunder that seemed so unnatural and artificial that it couldn't have possibly been ejected by a mere fox. It came in the form of a massive surge of wind, which struck the sand nin violently, lifting him with ease and blasting him away with the ferocious speed of a flying arrow. Yura slammed into the wall of trees, which were uprooted and shredded to pieces by the vixen's voice, and disappeared in an explosion of dust and greenery. While everything settled for a moment, and the air went silent and still, Chiyo glanced over at Naruto. Though the boy's face registered a slight gleam of triumph, it was still set in a fierce, unblinking glare at the pile of rubble. His fox partner, which had loped to his side, seemed to show a similar look. She was nonetheless amazed. It was an impressive technique, and to be able to give chakra with such ease to a bonded creature at such a distance, usually one had to be within a foot or two for such a thing to be possible. It either meant that Naruto's chakra control was better than she had guessed, or that the strength of their bond was very impressive. She felt it was the latter. Sakura smiled at Naruto's success, but kept her eyes focused on the ruined trees. There was something odd that she didn't quite understand yet. Her eyes caught the glint of Chiyo's ruined kunai a little ways away from where she stood. How did he do that? She wasn't positive, but she was sure that no such strength enhancement techniques, medical or otherwise, existed in the sand. It meant that either Yura had kept it a secret, much like his betrayal, or Akatsuki had outfitted him with it. She, too, felt it was the latter. Kakashi moved swiftly beside Chiyo. "You all right? I'll live," she said, with a snort as she rubbed her wounded ribs. She was quite sure at least one of them had broken, but did not think of it. The battle, she felt, had yet to end. From within the trees, there was a sudden movement. A dark blur emerged from the pile, flinging itself straight at Naruto and Suabuki. Yura, his cloak ripped and a pair of bruises on his cheek and forehead, ran at Naruto, lifting a kunai. Naruto freed his sword, bringing it up to meet the glittering knife, and when it struck there was a ringing crash of steel that nearly destroyed Suabuki's sensitive ears. Yura's knife hit with such force that had it struck something of equal strength to it, both weapons would have shattered, and his opponent would have been flung back or had his arm broken. But Naruto's sword was special. Instead of doing both, only Yura's weapon shattered, while Naruto stood firm and unmoving. A second later Naruto retaliated. He swiped his weapon forwards and slapped Yura in the cheek with the flat of the blade, and with it traveled back the kinetic energy that had gone into Naruto's blade from the Sand Nin's previous strike. That was the second talent of Magni's pride. Not only would it defend any hit, but any force that struck it would be absorbed, as energy could not be destroyed, and if possible, redirected. It was a trick Naruto had discovered in his weeks of training at Stormwind. As it stood, the force of Yura's hit, which before would have been enough to turn stone to dust, slammed back into its maker's face. With a hideous cracking sound, Yura spun, his neck twisting so much that he looked nearly to the front again when it had finished. His body flew back a few feet and landed like a sodden sack of grain on the ground. After a final, violent spasm, he stopped moving altogether. Kakashi gazed this time with amazement at his student. For once, instead of wasting his chakra and attacking his opponent in such a direct way, Naruto had won simply by a deft use of his weapon. No fancy jutsu, and he had done it with the effortlessness and ruthlessness of a proper shinobi. And he didn't quite know how he felt about that. Sakura walked steadily towards Naruto. She too was amazed. She glanced at the blonde's face, and found it had softened slightly. "Naruto?" she asked, softly. Naruto blinked, and turned to her. "Yeah, are you okay?" The blonde gave a small nod. "Yeah." He glanced back at Yura's lifeless form for a moment longer. He then abruptly turned and looked at Kakashi. Both his friend and former teacher felt relief when they saw the determination they knew well back in his eyes. "Let's go. We gotta go find Kurenai-sensei and the others, and get back to finding." He stopped at the same moment Kakashi's exposed eye grew as big as a dinner plate, and Sakura recoiled in horror. Chiyo merely stared passively at the scene, her rage mostly numbing her to such surprises, though she could not stop her mouth from dropping open slightly as she witnessed it. Yura was standing. The Sand Nin gazed with the same impassive, almost lifeless eyes at the team from Konoha, as he slowly twisted his neck back around to the position it was supposed to be in. There was another crack when he finally righted it, and he held it for a moment as the black and blue bruises on his neck began to fade, and within his vertebrae realigned and repaired themselves. "The hell was that?" Naruto cried, leaping away from the revived Yura. Sakura and Suabuki joined him a moment later, while Kakashi and Chiyo remained where they stood behind Yura. "What on earth?" whispered Sakura. "I'm guessing that's no Kekai Genkai," muttered Kakashi, looking at the old woman at his side. "No," Chiyo muttered, her eyes narrowing. His head now fully stable, Yura gave no more warning when he charged, not at Naruto, but Sakura. The black-cloaked shinobi was fast. He glided through the trees as if he belonged among them, so swift that even Kiba and Akamaru were having trouble keeping up. "He's trying to draw us away," Kurenai thought. It meant that he was merely trying to distract them long enough for his partner to finish the other team off, or he intended to find a place that suited him better and fight them there. And that power earlier. Eventually, the figure leapt from the trees and landed in a much smaller clearing, near the very edge of the forest they were in. Beyond it lay an expansive field filled with tall, green grass, and few trees. It was already late in the day, so the shadows of the mighty trees behind them flooded the field, as did the burning orange from the distant, almost setting sun. The man turned immediately to face them, exposing his face. It was a young man, with short spiky brown hair and dull blue eyes. He wore no visible forehead protector. But when Kurenai's group emerged from the trees as well, he raised his hands to make a seal. Hinata tensed, leaping to the front of the group, ready to use the Kaiden technique of her clan to defend her teammate from whatever attack he might be preparing. But he did not attack. Instead, he began to disappear. His body seemed to meld into the shadows he stood upon, fading until he became transparent, and then vanished entirely. Hinata's Byakugan immediately flared to life, but she could not see him. "What the hell?" snarled Kiba. "His sense gone again. Where'd he go?" Akamaru howled in agreement, his teeth gnashing and his tail upright and rigid. "I can't see him," whispered Hinata, frowning. She did not relax from her stance, before the man had appeared as if from nowhere, attacking Naruto-kun and his teammates. That meant that whatever ability this was could fool both her eyes and Kiba's nose. He would not simply run away after leading them so far, either. "What power is this?" thought Kurenai. "A Kekai Genkai, Shino," said Kiba, turning immediately to the quiet boy, who stared forwards into the gleaming light of the field, the sunlight turning his glasses into twin suns. "Did you?" Shino gave the barest of nods. He lifted a hand and pulled his collar down, as if planning to speak. Instead he looked immediately to the side, in a small breath, and suddenly blew out. From his mouth a black blur, a frightfully deadly insect, a variant of his Kikaichu, sped like a bullet, striking something unseen in the middle of the air. There was a grunt, and a moment later the Akatsuki member emerged, falling back and clutching a newly formed wound in which the bug had made its home on his chest. His eyes were slightly widened, though in pain or surprise it was hard to tell. He staggered back and coughed, splashing his lips and chin with blood. "He never left," said Shino, calmly. Ignoring his pain, The man drew a trio of kunai from the folds of his cloak, and threw them at Shino, Kiba and Kurenai. Shino merely dodged to the side, Kiba ducked beneath his, while Kurenai deflected hers with one of her own. At that same moment the man rushed at Hinata, who was closest. His eyes suddenly flashed green and he made a grab at her head, but Hinata was faster. Not bothering to leap back, the girl met the man's charge and slammed a palm into the middle of his stomach. An explosion of pain seared through his abdomen, stunning him, and allowing Hinata to follow up with a cry as she laid into him with dozens of swift and glancing blows coupled with bursts of her own chakra. Hake Rokujin Sho. The man flew back, spitting more blood. Whatever technique he might have been trying to perform lost along with his ability to use chakra. He landed roughly upon the ground, a few yards away, and lay still. "Nice, Hinata," said Kiba, with a grin in his teammate's direction. Kurenai slowly walked towards the man, her eyes narrowed. He lay unmoving, but she had seen such a trick before. She readied a knife, and stood, waiting. A moment passed. Kurenai suddenly launched herself backwards, throwing the kunai straight at the man's heart. But with her sudden movement, the man rolled to the side, avoiding the dagger and then leaping to his feet. His eyes suddenly flared wide, and the whites bled red. His body began to shake and his face contorted into a furious glare. He snarled like a wild animal and launched himself at Kurenai, his hands rising up into ferocious claws and his teeth bared. He moved with frightening speed, and if Kiba and Akamaru had not moved before that, he might have reached her. Gatsuga. A whirling mass of claws, fur and cloth slammed into the man's chest, shredding his cloak and clawing away layers of skin. As the man soared back, Kiba separated from Akamaru's large body and kicked off the dog's back. He flew straight at the man, grabbing onto his ruined cloak with both hands and then roaring into his face like a feral hound. He discharged a burst of chakra from his body, willing it to spin, and then slammed the man into the ground with all his might. The combined spinning and strength drove the man through a layer of soft soil and into a large boulder beneath, which shattered in tandem with the man's spine. The man gave a final gargling cry, a fountain of blood gushing from his mouth, before what life was left in his body flew from it. Kiba wrenched his claws free and jumped away. Kurenai and his teammates immediately rushed to join him, while he sneered in triumph at the fallen man for a moment, willing him to rise again. "Bastard!" he snapped at the corpse. "Good job," Kurenai whispered, nodding at the boy. She stepped past him, and gazed into the small crater in which the man lay, broken and bloody from a combination of her students' attacks. But the man was no longer there. She recoiled in disgust, wrinkling her nose as a foul scent struck her attention, and widening her eyes in amazement at the sight. The man's body had decayed, rotted to a point where it looked years dead. Its eyes had rotted out and its blood had congealed where it was, becoming dark brown stains on its leathery lips and around its body. All that remained of it was a dry husk covering a malformed, broken skeleton. What the hell?" whispered Kiba, stepping back. "Let's go," said Kurenai, turning away from the cadaver. "We can do nothing now. It's likely some sort of safety measure. Whatever techniques this man had, Akatsuki did not want them to be revealed. Let's return to Team 7, hopefully they will have sorted out their own opponent, as well." Her team nodded, turning their backs on the corpse and following back into the trees. A moment later, the ground shifted, and a pair of eyes, white as milk, rose from the tall grass. "One down. HMPH, let's remove him quickly." Yura's fist tore into the dry earth beneath Sakura's feet, nearly pulverizing the young girl with it. Sakura leapt just out of the man's range, taking only a second to marvel at his strength, but also noticing that it was just that, strength. It was nothing like the power she had learned from Tsunade, and thus she knew it would be nowhere near as dangerous. To prove her point, she stomped the ground, releasing a burst of tightly bound chakra that released like a shotgun blast beneath her, creating a shockwave that knocked Yura off balance. Kakashi tore forwards, drawing a kunai and throwing it at the man's head. Yura immediately ducked, and threw his hands into a seal as he did. For a moment, Sakura was caught in a moment of frightening tension, knowing she should attack and yet unable to, for fear of falling straight into his technique. In this moment, Kakashi and Naruto crossed the distance to Yura, and this is when he finally released his attack. Jinshuteki Genkei, Kijutsu Hanryu. Yura's eyes flashed green, and suddenly his body exploded into a torrent of bluish-green chakra, startling his attackers into stopping. The blue-green light swirled in every direction around Yura, licking them with its warm, tingling power, but at the same time, all three of them felt an immense exhaustion fall over them, as if they had just been fighting for hours on end. It lasted only for a moment, and then both the feeling and light were gone. Yura turned swiftly and swung a punch at Kakashi's head, prompting the man to dodge. Sakura took this time to rush forwards, and before Yura could move to counterattack, she hauled off and punched him in the ribs as hard as she could. And Yura barely moved. Instead of flying backwards from the strength of her punch, he looked as if any physically fit 15-year-old girl had struck him, not the student of Tsunade Hime, whose strength was legendary. Yura merely doubled over in pain for a scant second before pulling up and smacking Sakura across the face. She was thrown back 4 yards and landed roughly on her feet, stumbling and nearly falling. What? She thought, staring at her arm while she wiped a trickle of blood from her mouth. How did her strength, she suddenly realized, had not vanished, but had simply been unable to be released from her body. Whatever the man had done, it had removed her ability to expel chakra from her body, the same chakra that was the source of her monstrous strength. Kakashi noticed her distress and what had occurred before, and tried to produce a small burst of chakra from his fingers, and found he could not. A chakra inhibitor, he thought, looking towards Yura. He forcefully closed all of our tenketsu for a moment, using that technique. Yura twisted around, ready to face Kakashi, but then a strange look crossed his face, and he stopped. He suddenly changed his mind, and a moment later Yura was rushing at the only member who hadn't been hit with his technique, Chiyo. Suwabuki moved to intercept. She snarled at the man, suddenly blurring, lashing out with claws and teeth at his midsection. He grunted as the fox slammed into him, but he did not move. Instead, he grabbed her by the neck and lifted her with great ease, spinning and hurtling her back towards Kakashi and Sakura. Yura barely missed a step before he had continued his movement towards Chiyo. The old woman growled and thrust a hand out. It looked for a moment like she had done nothing, but a second later Yura stopped mid-run, as if time had frozen for him. Now, damn it, she snarled to her temporary teammates. I can't hold him for long. He's strong. Naruto. No chakra. Use only weapons. Naruto heard his sensei's cry from behind him as he ran. He reached Yura with but a second to spare, unable to use his Kazashi technique. With a cry he hammered a kunai into Yura's back, and then immediately jumped away, while the man stumbled forwards in pain and surprise. Oi, old lady, get away, there's a bomb! Naruto shouted. Chiyo backpedaled with surprising speed and ferocity for a woman her age. All the while, she gazed into Yura's slightly glazed eyes. He's waiting for you, Chiyo-basan, Sasori-sama is waiting for you, he said, ever so soft. She did not even hear him, only saw his lips, and saw the familiar movements of her grandson's name, which had been on everyone's when he had first left. And then Yura smiled, and died when the explosive note attached to the kunai in his back detonated. What the hell? Naruto muttered, when the dust had settled. He glanced at a stunned Chiyo through the smoke streaming from Yura's remains. What the hell was that guy? He smelled strange, muttered Suwabuki. Like a man, but not. I thought I smelt a troll, and perhaps some orc, and an even stranger scent, like a night elf, but not. It had disturbed the fox considerably to smell such familiar scents in such close proximity, when none of the sources could have possibly been present. She looked up at her partner, who looked down at her with confusion. What did that mean? The old woman glanced up at Naruto, her eyes narrowed and her face scrunched to look more like a large, white raisin with her powerful frown. She did not, truthfully, have an answer for the boy. She just shook her head, and walked around the smoking crater. That earlier technique sealed our chakra, muttered Kakashi, when they had rejoined. It seems to have worn off by now, however. He glanced at Sakura. You all right? The girl nodded, retracting a healing palm from her cheek, where she had been struck earlier. She was frowning, her large forehead wrinkled in confusion. Why did he do that? Do what? Asked Naruto. Attack us. Was it some sort of jutsu that forced him to do all of it? I remember Gaara telling me that he was one of the most loyal Sand Nin, and you seem to have thought the same, she said, glancing at Chio. He was. I believe Sasori did something, perhaps developed a mind-control jutsu. It would suit his personality well. She spat the poisonous words from her mouth, and gave a final glare in Yura's general direction, for it was difficult to know where exactly the majority of his body now rested. There is no other reason I can think of why he would betray us. It didn't even seem to be a surface compliance, it was as if he changed his very emotions and feelings and attitudes. If that is so, then he has become even more powerful than I can imagine. Kakashi nodded, and seemed about to speak, when the bushes at the far end of the clearing rustled and teammates shuffled out. All of them appeared uninjured, but they seemed as confused as Team 7 and Chio. Let's go, said Kakashi, finally. We'll travel as far as we can tonight, and stop to rest when it gets dark. I would disagree, mumbled Chio, it would be better if we continue to travel and attempt to reach their headquarters before dawn. Those two were not placed here to try and kill us. They were placed here as a distraction. She looked at all of them, her frown ever darkening. I think they have already begun the extraction process. What? Naruto asked, stepping towards her. The goal of Akatsuki, according to Jiraiya and furthered by their capturing of Gaara, is most certainly to extract the Biju from his body. They intend, I believe, to use it to create a new Jinchuriki. By doing that, they will be able to use the monstrous power that it contains, making them infinitely more dangerous than before. That is partly why we must go as fast as possible. Sakura frowned, she opened her mouth and readied to ask the woman what she meant by, partly, but Kakashi spoke first. Then we'll travel until we reach the headquarters, he said. Kurenai glanced at him. Is that wise? How long do we have until this extraction process is complete? She looked at Chio for this. It depends, the woman said. I do not know exactly the jutsu they have planned to use. It might be something they manufactured themselves, as they are all no doubt extremely powerful shinobi. But an enormous amount of chakra must be removed from Gaara. Though he is technically the weakest of the 9, Shukaku the Aikibi possesses the chakra equivalent of several hundred A-class shinobi. Therefore, it will take some time for them to draw it all out, and that is why we must move quickly. My guess is 2 days at the least, and they will have begun, no doubt, before we even left. Our only evidence for their continuation was the kunai fodder they sent to us. Kakashi softly nodded, but there's no sense in rushing in. We'll wait and plan out our attack from there. Fine. Naruto suddenly ejected, his body tensed and his eyes turned towards the edge of the forest, where Suabuki stood in anticipation with Akamaru. Let's just go. Chio's words sparked a new worry that Naruto couldn't quite explain. He just knew now that they had to reach Gaara as fast as possible. Faster, even. They needed to go, they needed to save him. Kakashi nodded, and they left the clearing. He strayed behind his students and their friends, and slid back to Chio, whispering into her ear as did. Tonight, you'll tell us the full story, I hope. Chio narrowed her eyes at the man, but nodded slightly anyway. Fine. Both distractions are dead. They will reach their current position at 2 hours past midnight at their current rate of movement. They hardly offered a distraction at all, yeah, said Deidara. They served their purpose well enough. Kongobutsu no Jutsu only works well for those whose bodies can take it. Your Sand Nin, Sasori, was rather receptive to the ability, the commanding voice said, the words dripping like molten gold. It's rare that someone can be infused with so many foreign cells and attain powers not their own for so long, without the degenerative effects. He even was able to regenerate a few times, and retained his strength until the end. Does it really matter? That toy is broken, it's ceased to be interesting. I am more interested in the group that may be coming here. Kyuubi Jinchuriki is among them, you said, Zetsu. Yes, the metronomic voice said. Then that one will be mine. The Kyuubi is the strongest of all the Biju, and one of the most difficult to attain. If we capture it now, when it's away from that damned village, it will be easier, won't it? Yes, the leading voice said. Then he's yours. Just don't get yourself killed, Sasori. You have yet to play your true purpose in this organization, and your other mission is just as important. I don't plan to. He won't be difficult. Which one is he? Blonde. Has a damn loud mouth and carries a dwarf sword. Don't underestimate him. He defeated the Broodmother, and trained under Jiraiya-sama for a time, said a soft, controlled voice. I won't fail, Itachi, unlike you. Even if there was a Sennin with him this time, I wouldn't. Now Sasori Dana, said Deidara, smirking at his partner across the room. Itachi-san did his best, yeah. Shut up, the leading voice said. Continue the extraction, it's almost complete. In the writhing mass of white below them, Gaara remained, and still he screamed. And strangely, he felt a growing heaviness in his eyes, slowly building up with each agonizing second. The pain was slowly disappearing. It will be gone soon. Soon, he'd be able to rest. Alone, as he had always been destined to. The stopped to rest a scant few hours before dawn, at the top of a ridge that led into a small, pristine valley. Kakashi knew they had entered the river country from the sudden change in flora and fauna. The trees were rich and beautiful and tall, each one they passed flowed with inner life and vigor, so green that they made emeralds pale in comparison. Compared to the previous area, which were mostly a mix of light green shrubs, bushes and short desert plants, due to the close proximity of the wind country, and short, stumpy conifers that despite giving enormous covering were unimpressive in appearance and possessed a fraction of the life the river country did. The animals were far more frequently encountered, deer, all manner of songbirds, and small mammals whose presence was just barely known by the shifting of the many shrubs that formed a second canopy over the ground. The most obvious thing Kakashi could see about the area was its potential for hiding. It was not a large country, but it was so vastly unpopulated that there were hundreds of places to have a hideout. Given also Akatsuki's extensive abilities and apparently low membership, it would be a perfect place. The ridge they stopped upon looked over a rather large waterfall and the pool it flowed into. It lay just below them, a place that looked so unassuming that had he had a girlfriend, Kakashi would have brought her there. It was calm and beautiful, and had he not known the truth of the place, he would have thought it relaxing. But he could not, for that was where he knew Akatsuki had made their hideout. Suwabuki, Pakun and Kiba had all agreed on the location. Though the water did mask their smell, the trail ended by the water. Hinata had then used her Byakugan to discover the location of the door behind the waterfall, and the seal upon it. From there, they had returned to the ridge, and made camp. So, Kakashi began, glancing away from the fire he had just built. Chiyo-sama, might you tell us now what you truly know about this situation? I do not feel comfortable continuing this mission until all of the facts have been laid out. You know enough about the technique they plan, or have already used, on Gaara. Why? While the rest of the team glanced at the man in confusion, Chiyo stared into the fire, her eyes slightly glazed. Because, she said, distantly, it is essentially the reverse process to what I used, when I sealed the demon Shukaku into Gaara's unborn body. Naruto stiffened, staring at the women with suddenly wide eyes. She did not meet his eyes, or even glance in his direction, solely focusing on Kakashi. 15 years ago, the fourth asked me to create a weapon for the sand to use against our enemies. He cited the leaf specifically, no doubt because he knew of my enmity for it, but also because before asking me he said that they themselves had gained control of one of the Biju. He wanted a counter to it, and Shukaku had always been ours to control. I had no qualms. I detested the leaf, and all other countries. I thought it would be my final mark upon the village, to protect it. It would be my final mission. I had no wishes, though I had lost everything, to die at that point, however. Therefore, I used a complicated seal on the vessel of his choice, his own son, still in his mother's womb. So originally, muttered Kurenai, Gaara was to be used as a weapon against the Kyuubi. She glanced sideways at Naruto, who was staring into the fire as if he had seen it for the first time. Among others, muttered Chiyo. From the very beginning, Shinobi have attempted to harness the power of the Biju. To do that, they needed to create a vessel, and there is no better one than a child of their own village. It is the perfect weapon, one they can mold to become more powerful than all the rest, and more deadly to their enemies than anything else. They call these weapons, Jinchuriki. Gaara is one of them. Sakura glanced sideways at Naruto now, her brow creasing with worry, her heart aching with each word the old woman spoke. Naruto looked entirely without emotion, and was staring at Chiyo harder than everyone else. Hinata noticed this strange occurrence, as well as Sakura's look, and wondered what was the matter. Shino observed this as well, and kept it hidden, suspecting what Hinata could not, or was afraid to. He glanced at Kiba, who was silent and listening intently to Chiyo's story, hanging upon every word. To answer your question, finally, Kakashi, there is a reason for my haste, and a good one. It is not only that if a Biju falls into their hands, they will become that much stronger. No, if they succeed in drawing out Shukaku, it will be the third time such a thing has happened. Every container before Gaara who has had the demon removed from him, using a variant of whatever jutsu they are using, has perished. What the hell? Everyone's gaze snapped to Naruto. The blonde was staring viciously into the fire, directing his anger into the intense heat of the flame, as if trying to feed it. He then looked up at Chiyo, and the woman was startled by the amount of force within his eyes. It was a look that she had not seen before, so powerfully emotional that it hurt to gaze into them. Even in all her years as a shinobi, she could not remember seeing a look such as that. Why the hell is it him? What the hell did he do to deserve this? To deserve anything? Just who did Gaara piss off in a past life to make him suffer like this? Naruto, Sakura whispered, in an attempt to calm him. All his life, Gaara's been treated worse than anybody. He's been treated like lower than trash, even less than the dirt that's been scraped off somebody's boots. He's been feared, hated, and what did he do to deserve it? 'Cause he had a father who was so stupid that he thought that using his kid to seal a demon would be a good idea. And now, after finally finding respect, after finally finding people who care for him, finally finding people whom he can call his precious people, here he thought of Kankuro and Temari, and each of their pleading looks and words before he had left, he's gonna die. After all of that, only if we let him, said Chiyo, regaining herself when the boy's tirade had finished. But his words had done more than ring through her ears, for her and everyone else. They had been so profound, and so passionately spoken, that Chiyo felt as if he had said them from experience. That is what we are here to do, isn't it? Then let's go, Naruto roared, standing. Wait a minute, Naruto, said Kakashi, standing up as well. As fast as we need to move, we can't simply go in and... What else are we going to do? Naruto said, glancing at his teacher. What else can we do? All we know about those guys is that one of them is Sasuke's brother, one of them is some guy with a big sword, one of them uses clay bombs, and the final one is a puppeteer like Kankuro. What use is it going to do just sitting here talking about plans of attack, when we don't even know if they're all there? And each moment we sit here, the closer it gets to Gaara dying. Kakashi-sensei, planning is just pointless and stupid right now. We need to just act. This is a rescue mission, we're going to retrieve Gaara, not fight all of them to the death. The best we can do is split up into teams. We just have to get in there and find him, before he's killed. He grit his teeth, twisting around to look down the ridge towards the waterfall. His voice became suddenly soft, still furious, but in such a way that he was speaking to himself. I don't care what you made me promise, Obaa-chan. I can't let Gaara suffer any more than he already has. The words thudded in Chiyo's ears. She looked away. His words had brought something back to her that she had thought time and years of solitude had eroded away, such a powerful guilt that it stood like a fortress in her mind. But for the rest of Naruto's friends and team, it brought pangs of sadness and worry like the coming tide. Suwabuki sidled up to Naruto, nudging the blonde's waist. Sakura suddenly stood. Then 2 teams will suffice, won't it? Attention turned to her. She glanced around, focusing specifically at Naruto, who was also staring at her. She briefly smiled at him, before returning her attention to the rest. There are 2 outcomes, aren't there? She said. One is that the entire organization, all 9 Akatsuki members, are hidden behind that door. If that occurs, then, like Naruto said, we launch as best a distraction as possible and rush in, grab Gaara, and leave. They'll probably give chase, but if we scatter, we can definitely outrun them. The second scenario would be that only 2 of them are in there, the one that defeated Gaara, and Chiyo Basama's grandson, Sasori. If that should happen, then 2 groups makes sense. 1 to each member of Akatsuki. Kakashi gave a brief nod. Of course, but we'll have to reduce the group numbers. You're forgetting the seal. Neither Chiyo nor Kakashi could make sense of the seal upon the door to the cavern. It blocked Hinata's view of whatever was behind the door, and even stranger were the tendrils of chakra that branched out from it, speeding in 4 directions away from it into the surrounding forest, forming a rough semicircle. It therefore, according to Chiyo, had 4 focal points that surrounded the original seal, and it was there that they would likely find a means to release it. But that required splitting up their group, and if Chiyo was guessing correctly, then the focal points needed to be disengaged at the same time in order to break the perfect harmony of the seal. Team 8, then, will work on releasing the seal, said Kurenai, standing as well. That will leave the 4 of you to deal with the Akatsuki members, which would be an easier number to escape should the first option occur. But harder should be the second, Kakashi said, but nodded nonetheless. But it's a chance we have to take. As Naruto said, it's time for action, not meaningless words. He glanced at Naruto, and winked. You somehow managed to get better at strategizing without having to give up your natural way of doing things. I'm impressed. Was that a compliment? Naruto muttered. Kakashi didn't answer, instead ordering Kiba to douse the fire. We'll go immediately. There's no sense in staying here any longer. The teams are simple. Naruto, his fox. Here, the fox in question growled slightly at the man, who amended his words immediately. Sorry, Suwabuki, and I will deal with the man who defeated Gaara, while Sakura and Chiyo Basama will deal with Sasori. Team 8 will release the seal. Should anything at all go wrong, retreat. I don't want anybody dying on this mission. That's an order. Sakura-chan, would you give everyone a soldier pill? It might be needed, considering what little rest we've gotten. Sakura nodded, fishing into her medical pouch for the small bottle of gray pills that boosted stamina and strength for a few hours. She quickly handed them out, and the group moved, their camp now dark, down towards the waterfall at a flying pace. Chiyo and Kakashi were the last to go, and before the old woman moved, she asked the silver-haired man, "Who is that boy?" Kakashi was silent for a moment. He is the container of the Kyuubi. He knows Gaara's pain because it was his own. He then flew down the mountain after the rest of them, leaving Chiyo alone for a moment, her expression veiled by shadow. Ah, youth, she whispered to nobody. Naruto ran next to Sakura. In the darkness, the girl could hear him speak in a voice just above a whisper. Thanks. Just be careful, she said, just as silently. She was glad it was dark. Glad that he couldn't see her face. Please, Naruto, please. He couldn't get captured. He couldn't be subjected to whatever fate Gaara was being subjected to. He couldn't die. She was glad it was dark, and that the trees blocked the moon from seeing her tears. They immediately split up when they hit the waterline. With a brief goodbye, and a promise from every team member to be safe, they departed. Hinata could not help but glance back once more at Naruto's hardened face as his team, after a moment of conversation between Sakura and Chiyo, crossed the water in light steps towards the waterfall. She wished every bit of luck upon him, hoping that when they returned, he would still be there, alive and well, and happy too. This mission needed to be a success. So she would do her best to make it one. She activated her Byakugan immediately upon entering the forest. The focal points were spread out less than half a mile in each direction of the mountainside, and glowed as bright as beacons to her chakra-sensitive eyes. They arrived at the first one, and with a brief once-over, Kurenai confirmed it. It was a simple barrier seal, given a few extra embellishments, and could be deactivated with a simple Kai technique. It was woven around a small post stuck in the ground, about 3 feet high. Kurenai was mystified by the presence of several seal markings on it that she had never seen before, and so with a word of caution to her students, told them to go to the 3 other points and wait for her signal. Kiba stopped at the next, the one closest to the wall of the mountain. Akamaru growled at the seal. "Be careful, you two," Kiba told both his teammates. "There's something about this that I don't like. Akamaru says there's something strange about the seal. I doubt it's gonna be as simple as it looks." "We will," said Shino. "Take care." Shino went next, giving Hinata a small nod of luck, never one to speak more than was needed. Hinata said a brief goodbye and set off again, stopping at the very far side of the area, where the mountain curved and the forest was thicker and darker than ever. She entered a small clearing, where in the center, she spotted the small barrier point. It looked deceptively innocent, despite its obviousness, and those who weren't trained in the shinobi arts would think little of it. She walked over to it, pulling out a small electronic headset from her weapons pouch as she did. Upon turning it on, and waiting but a moment, she heard Kurenai's crackling voice in her ear. "Now." Thrusting her hands together, she muttered softly, "Kai." The black markings suddenly vanished. Then nothing. She waited, breathing heavily. Still nothing. Was that all? The small cylindrical post suddenly quivered. It suddenly began to sink into the earth, accompanied by a faint rumbling sound. Rock and mud bubbled up around it, becoming almost fluid. Then it gradually began to rise up, forming a rough shape, and then a figure, and then a person. It was like staring into a mirror, Hinata thought. The waterfall parted. With a great shaking of earth, the water faded until it was but a few dripping streams, revealing an immense door covered in black seals. The sight of it made everyone present uneasy. They knew from this moment, their lives would be in frightening jeopardy. Akatsuki were some of the strongest shinobi in existence, as strong as, or perhaps stronger, than the 5 Kage who ruled over the shinobi world. A fight with just one of them would be suicide for a normal Junin, and even for people like Kakashi, they were far too dangerous to even consider fighting alone. The silver-haired man let out a quaking breath, knowing that in the next few seconds, one of 2 plans of attack would take place. The black seals suddenly faded, unraveling like a knot until only the strange runic symbols remained. Eventually, those 2 vanished, and with a sudden tremor, which was felt even upon the surface of the water, the door began to part. "Get ready," Kakashi whispered. His team tensed, Naruto most of all. His entire body quivered, equal parts anxiousness and anger. For whatever was on the other side, whether 9 or 2 of the deadliest shinobi imaginable, there was one thing he did not want to see. Finally, the door was open. Kakashi gave a slight wave of his hand, and 4 shinobi and 1 fox moved towards the gaping cavern. Kakashi was first, then Naruto and Suibuki, then Sakura, and then Chiyo. "What took you?" "Yeah." They froze. In the light that flooded the cavern, 2 figures stood, side by side, in such contrast that it would not have been so strange if one was aflame and the other was covered in ice. Both wore finely woven cloaks, blacker than the darkness that surrounded them, embroidered with crimson clouds. One was tall, thin and blonde, while the other was short, fat and vaguely red-haired. This man's face was wrinkled and tanned, like it was made of leather, and fixated into an eternal scowl. His blood-red hair was separated into 6 cornrows, and a black veil covered the lower half of his face. Behind them was a large, pure white bird. Kakashi was shocked by their audacity. It was disgustingly insulting, almost. These men believed themselves so superior that they even forewent conventional battle tactics. They had not even deigned to surprise them, when in such a position a surprise attack could be lethal to Kakashi and his team. Kakashi found himself furious with the two men. Were they simply so overconfident that they believed they could face 5 trained warriors and win without using a natural advantage? Were these not supposed to be some of the most terrible shinobi imaginable? Yet, while it angered him, it also terrified him. They could be overconfident, yes, but it was just as probable that it was possible for them to do it. It was just as possible that they were strong enough to fight and defeat all of them in a direct confrontation. But he would hope the opposite. They might underestimate him and his team. Then they would have the advantage. You've made us wait all this time, yeah. I mean, it shouldn't have taken you so long to figure out a plan and come down, right? And the seal wasn't that hard to beat, with that leaf bloodline of yours, Byakugan, right? The blonde man said, with an accompanying snigger. I could have built a terracotta army in the time you guys took to get here, isn't that right, Sasori Donna? Chio's eyes narrowed as the second one spoke, his voice bored and resonating. I suppose. They certainly took their time. We've already finished. Naruto's eyes widened, and then he saw what lay behind the tall one with the blonde hair. It was a small, dark figure, half shadowed by the other man, but whose face was clearly cast in the light. Gaara, asleep. That's only what it could have been, with such a peaceful look. He was asleep, not dead. He deserved at least some rest. He probably hadn't had a good night's sleep in years, perhaps all his life. He was allowed to sleep. Just for a while, long enough for Naruto and the others to get him out of here. Naruto, Suabuki's voice interrupted his thoughts. I cannot hear a pulse. Naruto glanced quickly at his spirit partner. He understood what she was saying, yet he didn't want to. No. Naruto's face suddenly twisted into the most murderous look any of his friends had ever seen. His eyes did not bleed red, either, and what they reflected seemed all the more horrible. It was such a look of rage that it seemed to kill a small part of his humanity with its presence. Suabuki was hit with such a wave of emotion that she herself began to growl and snarl. Chakra began to seep from Naruto's tenketsu, forming a dimly glowing aura around him. He quivered with a build of rage, a dam ready to burst. He looks angry, doesn't he, Sasori Donna? Grinned Deidara. I don't like angry people. Do you think I can have him? You already had your chance, the other stated. He's mine, but I want to fight him, the other man whined, glancing away from his enemies in another display of disgusting audacity to look at Sasori. I know that you're stronger than I, but that's why I feel I should prove myself. You have your art style, but I want to show you that mine is just as good. Nothing will change my opinion of your art, Sasori said, twisting his head in an oddly mechanical motion to look at Deidara. It is disgusting and pointless and will never be true art. But it is. Art inspires emotion, and my art does it splendidly. But emotions aren't forever. That hardly matters. Things that last forever will continue to inspire emotion, whereas your art simply reflects the mind-numbing stupidity of Philistines who can't see the truth in art. Those who simply see art as something pretty, or vibrant, or any number of pointless adjectives to describe a fleeting feeling. True art lasts forever. True art makes that feeling last until death. You're one to talk about feelings, Sasori Donna, yeah. With each word of their argument, Naruto grew ever more furious. He was snarling like a feral beast, and had adopted a crouched posture. But his eyes were still blue, and none of the dark chakra seeped into his system, from what Kakashi could see. Suabuki was no better. Naruto suddenly moved, blindingly fast. Naruto crossed the distance between him and the two Akatsuki members in a second, flinging himself straight at Deidara. The blonde man stopped arguing immediately, and with a triumphant laugh, blurred away, reappearing atop the white bird behind him. Naruto tried to follow, but from beside him something massive emerged from Sasori's cloak, as fast as he could move, narrowly missing impaling him in the side. He ducked, rolled, and turned to find a hideous, segmented protrusion coming from Sasori's cloak that resembled a tail. It was a light tan in color, and appeared to be made of wood or something similar. At the end was a wicked sharp spear-like piece with glistening black stripes down each side. The tip was black as well. "He's mine," said Sasori, in a voice sharper than normal. "We'll let him decide, won't we?" laughed Deidara. "Follow me, kid." The huge bird moved suddenly, bending down and opening a gaping mouth. It scooped up Gaara's body, and before Naruto could stop him, hurtled itself into the air, towards the back of the cavern. Naruto didn't even think. He flew after the man, like a raging windstorm with the Kazashi, suddenly there and then suddenly not. Suwabuki followed swiftly. "Remember the plan," roared Kakashi, taking off after his wayward student. "I'll find him." He rushed past Sasori, who let him go without qualm. In fact, as soon as Naruto had left, he had lost all interest in the Kyuubi child, and was now staring at Chiyo, his two glossy black eyes narrowing at the woman. When Kakashi was gone, disappeared into the blackness of the cavern, it left Sakura and Chiyo alone with the man. "Chiyo-ba," he said. His tone was perfectly emotionless. "Sasori," she muttered back, closing her eyes and heaving a slight sigh. "So we finally meet again, It's been over 20 years. Yes. You've gotten pruny, haven't you?" he said. "And you've gotten fat, unless that's one of your puppets. Don't you remember Hiriko?" he asked, tilting his, or perhaps not, head to the side. "He was always your favorite," she said, coldly. "You always did like getting your hands dirty. Being able to fight up close without fear of suffering harm. Not a conventional puppeteer at all." Sasori nodded robotically. "I've modified him a bit, however, as you'll find out." He then seemed to notice Sakura. "And a leaf nin. I haven't fought one in a long time. Not exactly the epitome of feminine beauty, but you'll do, I suppose." Even worried as she was, Sakura felt a burst of anger at the forefront of her mind. She narrowed her eyes and clenched her fists hard enough to bite through the leather of her gloves at the slight. "I haven't added any females to my collection in a while, Chiyo-ba. I'd like to have both of you as soon as possible." "Collection," thought Sakura. "I'm afraid you'll be disappointed," said Chiyo, sounding tired and old. "I've come here to do one thing, Sasori, destroy you. I have been dreaming of this day for quite a while. I'll be able to die in peace knowing that you'll be going with me." She gave a rasping chuckle. "You'll have the ultimate disgrace of being slain by an old woman and a young girl. I hope you're prepared, Sasori." "For death?" he asked, tilting his head to the side again. "I wonder." Chiyo suddenly let fly from her robes a dozen shuriken. Sasori's tail flew up, deflecting most, but the ones that did strike tore through his cloak and then bounced off what sounded like thick, hard wood. Sasori charged towards the two girls, his tail lashing out like a striking snake. But they both dodged, and it merely crashed into the earth, obliterating a section of the stone floor. Chiyo distanced herself immediately. Her grandson, she noticed, had gotten far stronger and more skilled in the years he had been away. To manipulate such a large and bulky puppet in such a swift and subtle manner was beyond the skill of most puppeteers, even after a lifetime of training. She remembered all she could about Hiriko. Aside from the tail, which was easily its most deadly aspect, she could not remember what specific skills it had, other than the protection for the puppeteer himself. She did, however, remember a weakness on its backside, where the tail emerged. Pulling from her robes a kunai, and attaching to it a particularly powerful explosive note, Chiyo waited. But Sakura did the exact opposite. As soon as Sasori's attack failed, she ran towards him, armed and raised. The puppeteer turned to look at her suddenly, and the veil suddenly ruffled, as if a passing wind had blown it aside. But Sakura saw the flickers of the little slivers of metal that emerged, her eyes long trained to detect such things. She ducked, and then leapt far to the side, Sasori's tail coming down on her again. As soon as she was far enough away, something shot past her, striking Sasori upon the back. A second later, the entire puppet was engulfed in a smoldering blast of fire and smoke. Chiyo allowed herself a small smile. If she was lucky, then that would remove the tail and cut Hiriko's power in two. But Sasori emerged, suddenly, unharmed. Bits of his cloak lay in cinders about him, and the entirety of his form was revealed. Comprising the entirety of his back was a large, hideously grinning mask, its mouth agape. From the mouth was the end of the tail. The rest of Sasori's body was big and bulky, like a turtle's shell. His two arms stuck out near the front, one long and normal, the other a strange deformity. The fingers were large and profoundly geometric, and surrounding the forearm was a large, cylindrical tube with many smaller tubes sticking out of it. "I told you," Sasori said. "I made some adjustments. I couldn't let that weakness remain." Chiyo did not attack again. She moved around Sasori, her ancient legs carrying her nonetheless swiftly to Sakura's position. The pink-haired girl was panting, both from strain and the knowledge that had but a single one of those pins struck her, she might have been slain. "He had poison in just everything he used against me," Kankuro had said. "Especially in the tail. That is not Sasori's body," Chiyo whispered as soon as she appeared next to Sakura. "We must destroy it. Your strength should be sufficient for that." Sakura glanced quickly at her, and then went back to Sasori. The puppeteer had turned and was patiently waiting for them to continue or stop their discussion. She grit her teeth in annoyance. "But how do we? I'll see to that." Sakura glanced back at the old woman. There was a crooked smile on her face. Sakura had not yet seen the woman use it. It was the first time Chiyo had smiled at her. So she smiled back. Sakura's body reacted without warning. She ran forwards, as if her legs were suddenly autonomous. Sasori suddenly thrust out his deformed left arm. As Sakura rushed, a curling blast of smoke erupted from the joint, and the arm shot off like a small rocket, directly towards Sakura. It then exploded. A wall of darkness erupted from the weapon, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of tiny needles black as obsidian, each one dripping with enough poison to kill a dozen men. They came at Sakura with such speed that she had no time to think or fear for her life. But they did not strike her. She found herself moving all on her own. Her body weaved, bent, twisted and flipped in such manners that not even Lee was capable of. By a hair's breadth the weapons missed her. Not even a single graze, or a nick on the clothes. It was as if she was dancing to avoid the rain, and each movement was so light, so automatic that Sakura felt like a distant observer in her own body. It was as if she stood to one side, like Chiyo, and was watching the intricate dance in amazement. Her own face reflected this all the way until she was but 3 feet from Sasori, whose large glossy eyes had widened at the display of grace. She found herself hauling back, and began to gather chakra into her fist, focusing it into a tiny singularity. Sasori's tail swept around, speeding straight at her chest. Her body jerked back, just narrowly avoiding death, and her fist flashed forwards, smashing into the tail and destroying the chakra-soaked wood, which was as hard as steel, as if it were plywood. It offered no shield to Sasori, but he jumped back anyways, lifting his remaining arm and pointing it at her. It split down the middle, flew apart, and from it emerged a long blade, blackened by his poison. It burst out, aiming for her chest, but her hands flew together, catching the blade between her palms. She swiftly snapped it, shattered the rest of the blade with a punch, and then lunged forwards, throwing with all her might a fist into Sasori's covered chest. She released a burst of chakra even greater than the last, and it struck Sasori with the force of a small explosion. It smashed through layers of wood, and blew apart his entire body like a toy being flung into a wood chipper. Sasori's head flew up, fixated with a final look of vague surprise, the veil obscuring his face flying off, and exposing a gaping lower jaw separated into 3 pieces, like a nutcracker's. The rest of his body scattered across a short distance, the face upon his back no longer grinning. And when it all settled, beneath the black cloak his puppet had once hidden under, the true Sasori emerged. Damn it, Kiba hissed, drawing back, clutching his wounded hand with the other. His doppelganger did not let him rest long, and came at him again, claws flying. This time Akamaru attacked, biting at the mimic's legs, but yelped as soon as his mouth made contact with the flesh. Kiba's doppelganger remained unharmed, while Akamaru now sported a fresh new burn on his tongue. Kiba stared at the copy. It was truly like looking into a mirror, yet there were two slight differences. The first were the eyes. Kiba's eyes were black. This one's eyes were orange, like fire. The second was the addition of two finely crafted golden bracers that were attached to his doppelganger's wrists. They were large and incredibly valuable looking, covered in strange designs and spell paper with all sorts of strange kanji. Kiba resolved that he'd nick these once he had defeated the bastard. He glanced at Akamaru. Ranged attacks, then Akamaru. Let's kill this bastard and find the others. Akamaru barked in agreement, and they renewed their attacks with a singular howl. Elsewhere, Shino was only slightly less frustrated. The doppelganger that faced him was swift and almost incorporeal. No matter how many kikaichu he threw at it, whether they were the conventional drones or the highly swift and deadly bombardiers that he fired from his mouth, they simply seemed to move through it. But its strikes were painful enough, and it duplicated his use of bombardier bugs by flinging small bursts of air in his direction which stung as if he had been struck by a blunt kunai. He let out a soft breath. He needed to do this quickly. It was made from chakra, no doubt. His bugs were attracted to it like the plague. It would soon run out of energy to function, as long as he could continue the attack. Hinata dodged another punch, slapping her doppelganger in the face. It barely moved, and did not slow in its next attack. This had been occurring for quite some time. No matter how many times she struck it, none of her chakra had an effect. That meant that this being somehow had no chakra system of its own. Without a chakra system, it couldn't be classified as a living creature. Her Byakugan told her the same. This being was just a mass of chakra, somehow given form. If she had to guess, it was the bracelets on its arms. She did not recognize any of the markings upon them, but the chakra seemed to converge around them, and every so often it would release a pulse of power throughout the body. She guessed this was how it stabilized itself, and was given form. It looked like nothing more than a particularly stubborn Earth clone. Kurenai had a similar belief. Her doppelganger was swift and fluid, any damage it suffered did not remain. It was like punching a wave. She had wasted several kunai, and even an explosive note, but the being dodged like she did, and in the off chance it was hit, it never suffered true damage. It's ingenious, she thought. She had never seen such an advanced level of elemental manipulation. It was no water clone, but they were solid until struck, and this one could switch between the two, and was a mimic of her as well. It used her techniques, even ones that she had never displayed to it. She dodged another blow, thinking as fast as she could. An inkling of a plan began to form in her mind. Perhaps it was that simple. Congratulations, Sasori said, his voice drawn and bored. You've destroyed one of my favorite puppets. I wasn't sure how you got so fast for a moment, girl, but I see it now. He glanced at Chio. You used chakra strings, didn't you? Controlling her like a puppet, haha, it's ingenious. You haven't lost your touch, old woman. Chio couldn't remove her eyes from the man before her. He had fiery red hair, inherited from his father, and a smooth, porcelain face, with a rounded, feminine jaw. It was unmarked and perfect. His eyes were large and blue, like a child's, but also slightly glassy, like those of a doll's. It was devoid of any emotion, but none of this was what truly struck her as horrible. He had not aged. Not one day in 20 years had Sasori gotten older. What? Whispered Sakura, turning to face him with wide eyes. Chiyo-sama, is this really? What have you done? Chiyo asked, glaring coldly at Sasori. Simply following my philosophy to its fullest, the man said, smiling. He did not look much older than Sakura or Naruto. He looked like a boy, even though he was reaching into his 30s. Though I'm impressed by both of you. I didn't expect the girl to have such frightening strength, nor did I expect you to be so up to snuff. He reached into his black cloak, removing from it a large, red scroll. Do you know what a hitokugutsu is, Grandma? Chiyo narrowed her eyes. Of course she did. It was the most forbidden technique a puppeteer could practice. It involved ripping out the entrails and skinning a human body, whether recently dead or still alive, and replacing all of its bodily functions with mechanics and wires and special seals, along with dozens of traps, to create a perfect puppet. It was said that such puppets had the ability to use some of the techniques they had in life. It was what he had made his parents into. Precisely, said Sasori, giving a nod and a small, emotionless smile. But in my travels, I have discovered many things. I have created many hitokugutsu, because I believe immortality is the perfect form of art imaginable. To preserve beauty, whether physical or functional, for all eternity is an amazing thing, don't you think? I have amassed a considerable collection. I'm rather proud of it, you know, I love to brag. I so far have 307 puppets in my collection. Sakura could not stifle her gasp. 300. He had murdered that many people in his life. I am telling you this because for you to fully appreciate the beauty of this puppet, you need to know that nearly all of them are humans. I have scoured many countries for those who possess rare and powerful abilities that I wish to capture in time and preserve, to make immortal, so to speak. But there are several, this one included, that I have created because they mean something more to me. I was most impressed with this one, for example. He placed a hand on the scroll, almost lovingly, and then unfurled it. He smiled, and sent a jolt of chakra into it, causing the appearance of a gigantic cloud of smoke, which engulfed Sasori completely and forced both Chiyo and Sakura to move away towards the back of the dimly lit cavern. You see, this one is the only puppet that I have, that was once called a god. The smoke cleared, and Chiyo and Sakura found themselves facing a monster. It resembled a gargantuan blood-red snake. It did not look at all natural, however, for replacing the fine scales on its body were thousands of tiny wooden plates fitted perfectly together, giving the creature a smooth and mechanical look. Its mouth was firmly shut and its eyes were big, red and glossy. Down the back of its head was a large crest, like a rooster's, turquoise in color, that was made up of perfectly cut triangles. It had long appendages that may have once been wings, but now were a pair of massive steel fans. For arms it had huge scythes, and for legs it had a long, winding tail made up of perfectly joined yet perfectly artificial segments. Large spikes surrounded an oval door on its chest. Written on the door was the kanji for blood. His name was Hakar the Soulflayer. I came upon him in my travels in what is called the Outworld, to us, said Sasori, glancing up at the beast with a blank smile, his eyes wide in perverted wonder. What on earth? Sakura gasped, stepping back towards Chiyo. The old woman mirrored her look flawlessly, staring up in horror and awe of the perfectly created beast. He was nearly dead when I came to him. He had been attacked and nearly destroyed by a band of his own former followers, seeking freedom from his tyranny. He gave a quiet laugh at this. It took me an entire day to remove just his organs and then more than a week to finalize everything. But his body didn't even begin to rot. He said, with a facsimile of surprise in his tone. Isn't it beautiful? This is the power of my artistry, Chiyo-ba. He laughed again. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. I plan to add both of you now, he said. You'll both make 309. Perhaps if Deidara hasn't obliterated him, I'll take the silver-haired man as well. Sasori smiled strangely at both of them, as if he was saying goodbye to two old toys that had served him well, and were now being consigned to the trash heap. He raised a hand. Chiyo-ba, do you want to be first? Hakar's puppet raised one of its huge, deadly arms, and brought it down in a swishing arc towards the two women. They split apart, each going in separate directions, letting the blade fall on nothing but earth. The serpentine beast whipped around to Chiyo, bringing with it another deadly swipe, this one horizontal. Chiyo ducked beneath the fatal blow, which would have easily sliced her in two, and dove her hands into her robes, producing from it a pair of seal scrolls, black in color, tied with red string. With a few flicks of his fingers, Sasori made Hakar open its great mouth with a whirring sound, revealing a large tube where the tongue should have been. From the tube a spout of searing hot flames suddenly erupted, streaming in a wide, cone-shaped path down atop Chiyo, just as the woman unfurled the scrolls and summoned their contents into being. From behind the great red beast, Sakura caught a glimpse of the flames engulfing the old woman. She gave an incoherent shout, rushing forwards towards Hikaru's back, where the tail met the ground. She leapt into the air, raising a leg in preparation for a kick. Sutenkyaku. But before her leg connected, just one moment before, some scales on Hikaru's body shifted, and from the resulting hole a form erupted, tall and light green in color. Sakura's leg did not strike the wooden exterior of the beastly marionette, and instead struck the glowing chakra shield of a large and imposing Hitokugutsu that was clearly not human. It had big, leathery ears, straight tusks on either side of its mouth, and a dead, glossy stare. What? Sakura was allowed a brief moment, all of the force from her kick traveling into the shield and leaving her bereft of balance as well as causing no damage to her attacker, before she was airborne again. She was flung violently back by the emotionless, tusked puppet, its shield sending the absorbed kinetic energy back in a concussive wave of energy that left Sakura momentarily senseless. She hit the ground on her back, skidding away from Hikaru, landing very near where Sasori stood. His next words, so close that she believed she could feel his breath, chilled her beyond words. I had to make up for the power that he lost by including his priests, those who worshipped him in life and gave their very beings to him. They, unfortunately, do not contain the powers they had in life, as most of their chakra was gone when I found their bodies, but I feel they deserve to be with their master. He gave another emotionless laugh. Such devotion, this is the power eternity has over people. Sakura got to her feet, gasping, and turned to face Sasori. The man, however, was not looking at her, but found his attention drawn back towards the smoldering area where Chiyo had been. And still was. She stood behind a pair of puppets. One was clearly female, with long black hair, while the other was clearly male, with short red hair. Both had faces and eyes made perfect by their artificiality. They were holding their hands out, and from them had sprung 4 plates, which were surrounded by glowing chakra. Sasori had a strange, distant look on his face as he gazed at them. "You brought them?" he asked, calmly. "I figured I'd bring the whole family," sneered Chiyo. Her face contained a crooked smile, belonging only to an old woman of her spirit, but her eyes were sad and pained as she looked upon 2 of the people she had loved most in this world. Sakura stared. Family, she thought. Did that mean that they were Sasori's parents? "They annoyed me," Sasori said. "They were ungrateful fools. I gave them immortality and they didn't seem to like it." He shook his head. "Why did you bring them here, Chiyo-ba? I guess I'll have to destroy them both, then." "Then try it," retorted Chiyo. "They want to give you a hug, Sasori, can't you see? You can't deny parents a chance to hug their child, can you?" Sasori cocked his head to the side. "Why not?" He crossed his hands and Hikaru suddenly moved forwards. One of its scythe arms suddenly split in half, and from it a stream of black spears erupted, raining down on Chiyo and her puppets with deadly force. The old woman sneered, rushing forwards, sending her puppets upwards. They flew, weaving through the deadly rain, and coinciding with Chiyo's hand movements, deployed their own weapons. Sasori watched without emotion as his father literally removed his right hand and threw it towards his mother, who caught it with one hand, as a giant 3-bladed claw unfolded from the other. His mother flew to Hikaru's right, and his father to the left. He would have continued gazing in awe, but he suddenly became aware of another presence on his side, and needed to leap back in time to avoid a right hook from Sakura. The girl twisted and kicked him in the side, but again he moved, dancing away without changing expressions. Lightning quick she was on him again, throwing a dozen blurring punches at his head and chest. He pulled and twitched the chakra strings attached to his fingers, telling Hikaru to turn. Chiyo sent her daughter-in-law's puppet straight at Hikaru's head, while she guided her son towards his midsection. Sasori's mother threw her husband's detached hand, where it stuck upon the smooth, artificial scales of Hikaru's chest, to the left of the marked door. By this time, Hikaru was in mid-turn to deal with Sakura's attacks. His long arms slashed in surprisingly quick, decisive blows, driving Sakura away from Sasori with their ferocity. Sasori's mother drove her clawed weapon into Hikaru's head, flying across his face and slicing deep into the flesh. At the same time his father thrust up the hole created by his removed hand, and with a single twitch of her finger, Chiyo released the weapon within. A stream of kunai, each of them bearing an explosive note, shot from the tube and headed straight for Hikaru's chest. Half-turned as he was, they shouldn't have struck the front, yet the kunai moved of their own accord, circling around Hikaru's big body and striking in rapid succession the very same point Sasori's father's hand was stuck. Sasori watched again in detached amazement as the entire front of Hikaru was engulfed in a searing blast of flame and smoke, which shook the cavern in an immense boom. Sasori then watched as his mother removed her claw from Hikaru's head, and moved with his father straight towards him. He also saw Chiyo's determined, fiery glare. And he felt a brief spark of amusement. It was not much, but the sudden feeling of elation seemed to awaken him. His eyes widened and he smiled a little larger than he usually did, even exposing his teeth. What fun, he thought. He twitched a finger, drawing a small chakra string back. Hikaru's tail lifted up, the end opening and revealing 4 metal plates inscribed with seal spells. He sent a jolt of chakra through the strings, causing the seal markers to shoot out white smoke and summon the weapons contained within. Out came a forest of spearheads attached to long chains, 3 of which impaled his father and another which drove itself through the chest of his mother. The chains then coiled around them, wrapping them up tight enough to crack their bodies in the gleaming black steel. Chiyo stared in horror. That's impossible. No puppeteer on earth has that amount of control. It would require hundreds of chakra strings to manipulate such fine details. Sasori nodded to himself, the feeling of elation passing as swiftly as it had come. He frowned. He observed the damage to Hikaru passively. The explosion had weakened the puppet's chest severely, but had caused no cracks. The damage was minimal. Chiyo cursed upon seeing this as well. He must have put an enormous amount of effort into this. She could do nothing but glare at Hikaru, for it pained her too much to see her son and daughter-in-law, puppets as they were, entangled as they were, and pained her even more, to see Sasori the one behind it. She needed to destroy that puppet. No, they needed to. She turned to look for Sakura, wondering where the girl had gotten to. She saw nothing. Where is she? The woman thought, wondering if the girl had abandoned her for a brief moment, but shunting that aside. No, if she was anything like that slug woman, then she would not do such a thing. What's wrong, Chiyo-ba? Asked Sasori. Were they the only ones you brought? Of course not, she snorted. But they are the only ones I am going to use on you. Ah, he said. Hikaru's head spun back towards Chiyo, opening once more. But instead of the spout, there were now rows and rows of sharp, gleaming swords for teeth. The mouth opened as wide as it could go, and the gums stuck up, preparing the teeth blades to be launched as missiles. Chiyo steadied herself. She could dodge this. She was not useless yet. Bye, Chiyo-ba, Sasori said. Then a blur of pink and red fell from the ceiling, striking Hikaru's head so hard and with such a fluid and powerful motion that in one moment, the head was there, and in the next, it had exploded in a shower of metal and wood, with Sakura right in the middle, her leg buried deep into the puppet's body. In the same movement, she flipped off Hikaru's neck and onto his back, and with incredible speed and grace ran down the puppet's back. Sasori cursed, flicking a hand. Several scales shifted along the tail, causing 3 pale green hitokugutsu to emerge. One of them clutched a shield, and the other 2 raised their hands. 4 large flaps, one on each side of their arms, sprang up, and in a gust of smoke thousands of grasping arms erupted, moving in twin streams towards Sakura. So she improvised. With a cry, she smashed her foot into the surface she stood upon, the middle of Hikaru's tail, injecting it with a bolt of chakra equivalent to falling meteorite. It blew apart the tail where she stood, severing it in 2, making the traps at the end effectively useless. The entire tail fell to the ground, and Sakura leapt away from the torrent of arms, leaping and flipping until she reached safety, the ground in front of Hikaru. What? Sasori thought, frowning. From his position, he could see the girl quite plainly. And yet he still could not believe it. Chiyo found herself smiling. Clever girl, she thought. She then saw Sakura's movements, the quivers with each slight motion, the determined posture, and the monstrous power of her previous attack. She was using the very technique Chiyo had found herself praising at the previous Chunin exams. Nuha Sayu. Sasori frowned, staring at the girl. Her movements had changed. How odd. And now she possessed enough destructive force to blast through layers of chakra-soaked wood, which meant she posed a significant threat to the safety of his puppet. He glanced at the fallen tail. He flicked his hands, causing the three priests, he didn't bother to note what three, to leap out. He then glanced back at Chiyo, just in time to see his parents rejoin her. His father was still impaled in 3 places, and had several chains still attached. His mother had disposed of her imprisonments, and had only a small hole in the black robe she wore. He glanced back at Sakura. She was a problem. It looked like he'd have to use that, then. He shrugged. It didn't matter. I had been waiting to use it anyway. Sakura's body quivered with each breath she took. Her sense of touch had dulled a bit from the adrenaline and endorphins she had pumped into her system, but her other senses were alive and well. She was cut in several places and bruised in many others. Oddly, however, she felt no touch of poison in her system. That meant that he hadn't poisoned everything on this puppet. Don't worry, said Sasori, there's no poison on most of the weapons on this puppet. That would be too troublesome, and synthesizing that amount of poison would be annoying. He jerked a hand, making Hikaru move back towards him, which was a bit difficult, as it no longer possessed the latter half of its primary mobilizing limb. He jerked another hand, making Hikaru sit up straight. But that's because I have something else for this puppet. He jerked a hand, and the small oval door on Hikaru's chest began to open. Sakura stared up at it, seeing a fine, red mist begin to seep from the hole, which glowed crimson. You see, Hikaru's true title was the blood god of the Gurubashi Empire. The Gurubashi being a long-dead empire in the world that Hikaru comes from. The same world, in fact, that the Kyuubi boy came from. Sakura's eyes widened. His most dangerous attribute was not his fearsome size, nor his ability to sustain damage, nor his incredible strength or any other number of fierce physical abilities he possessed. His true power, the one that made him so dangerous to his attackers, was something much greater than any poison one could ever manufacture. It has a name in its own language, Hatmashar, or as we might call it, corrupted blood. Sasori's finger gave a final twitch, and Hikaru lurched forwards. From the oval hole a stream of the red mist erupted, descending upon Sakura with frightening speed. The girl leapt away, but when the mist struck the ground it spread outwards. Chiyo and her puppets backpedaled towards the wall, while Sakura ran to the side. Hikaru turned with her, sending another stream in her direction, while at the same time lifting one of its side hands and bringing it slashing down at Sakura. She twisted, punching the blade aside with a devastating blow, but was a fraction too late. A small wisp of the red mist touched her skin, on one of the small wounds caused by her punches. It was only for a second, and then Sakura was away again, distancing herself as far away from the mist as possible, unaware that she had been touched. Hikaru turned again, planning to continue its attack. But its master stopped it, suddenly. Sasori gave the girl a light smile when she met his eyes. It's done, he said. You're dead. Sakura frowned, her heart pumping fast. What? She thought. What did he mean? Has she been touched? She glanced around her, suddenly afraid. Her heart began to beat faster. A sliver of pain shot through her arm. She glanced at it, seeing one of the wounds beginning to bleed profusely. Another pain, this one deeper, suddenly shot up her arm, towards her chest. Her heart beat ever faster. She began to sweat, feeling a heat deep within her beginning to burn. Hatmashar is the deadliest disease created by nature. It has a mortality rate of 100%. He tilted his head to the side. It is also the most painful way of dying imaginable. Your blood will begin to boil alive inside you, and you will not die until the very end, when every artery, vein, and capillary in your body has burst. He gave her a small smile, that in a moment Sakura thought rather reminded her of Gaara's, except without any shred of kindness or remorse, or even anything else. There was nothing in that smile. Nothing at all. Her brain, active as it was telling her that everything was wrong. Her body heat was rising. Her heart was beating faster and faster. Her wounds began to stream blood, and every part of her body began to burn. She screamed. Blood began to stream from her nose, her mouth, her ears, even her eyes. She gagged on it. There was so much blood. The pain was unbearable. She couldn't stop it. She screamed. Sakura! Screamed Chio, rushing towards the girl. You will die too, Grandma, if you touch her blood. Then you'll have no chance to do as you told me you would, said Sasori. Just watch. It'll be over soon. It was over in another second. Sakura fell, blood streaming from every pore on her body. Her eyes had rolled up into her head. She landed on her stomach. She twitched a few times, and finally lay still. She did not move again. No, whispered Chio. No, Sakura. Kurenai released a deep, shuddering breath. She did not attack, and hence, neither did her doppelganger. They stood, barely 3 feet from toe to toe, each staring steadily forwards. There was no possible way that this creature could have absorbed her attacks and movements from just watching her. It couldn't, therefore, be a sight-based jutsu, nor could it be a one-time process. Somehow, as she thought of them and prepared for them, this doppelganger was copying her attacks. And she thought she had the answer. She made a single hand seal, taking a deep breath. And she stopped. For a scant few seconds, her chakra coil system froze in time. Every bit of chakra that flowed through her body came to an arresting halt, and in that moment, the body of Kurenai's doppelganger grew faint. Its skin and clothes became transparent, and Kurenai was able to see what was beneath. It appeared to be no more than a mass of living water, shaped vaguely like a man's torso. It was nearly as tall as her, and dark blue as the sea. But holding her chakra system was as painful and straining as tightening a muscle for too long. She released her breath, and once again the doppelganger became whole. So that's it, she thought, smirking. By deactivating the seal, she had formed a connection with the trap, and her chakra was continuing this technique, and yet, she could not explain the water beast beneath her doppelganger's skin. She had never seen something like that before. Was that what was giving it its properties? But that meant she still had to find a way to destroy it, once she had stopped it from following her attacks. Her eyes lingered on the golden armbands. They, no doubt, had something to do with it. Her plan was decided, then. She flipped open a weapons pouch, pulling out a kunai and an explosive note. She carefully wrapped the note around the dagger, watching as her doppelganger mimed the action with a kunai of its own. She would have to act fast. She put the kunai between her teeth, slammed her hands together again, and stopped, once more. The image faded, and with all her might, she continued to halt her chakra, while reaching up, grabbing the kunai and hurtling it. It flew at a downward angle, striking the ground just below the water creature, and exploded. The creature was scattered across the clearing in a shower of water. The golden armbands were flung in opposite directions, landing with soft thumps on the hard earth. Kurenai then let her chakra flow once more, gasping loudly as she did. She glanced about. It was done. She waited a few seconds just to be sure, and then left the clearing with a swift bound, heading into the forest. She jammed an earpiece into her ear, and shouted into the headset. Hinata, Shino, Kiba, report. What's happening? I've finished, came Shino's slow monotone. Done here, Hinata's voice crackled, with obvious relief. Just did it. I was waiting for somebody to call. Kiba cried, joyful to hear his teammates speak. She smiled in relief. But there was pride there as well. They had figured it out all on their own, and had defeated the technique as she had. Let's go meet Team Kakashi. They might need some aid. Her students agreed, all quite vociferously. Kurenai changed direction immediately, heading down the slope and towards the waterfall at the bottom. There was a sudden coldness in her bones, and she felt quite worried. She hoped they were all right. They emerged from a small opening in the very back of the immense cave. It had taken them all the way through the mountain, and out into the fresh, dark, early morning air. Deidara erupted forth from the cave, his avian mount taking him high above the river that lay below, between the mountain he had emerged from and a tall cliff. He flew nearly level with the treetops on the cliff, gazing down with a pleased smirk as he saw the Kyuubi brat appear a moment later, in but a blur of motion that he himself had difficulty following. So that's how he kept up. Yeah, he thought. He hadn't been actively trying to lose the boy in the cavern, but he had been moving fast enough to keep out of the distance of most shinobi. But the boy had nearly caught him 3 times, and he had been forced to speed up an equal number of times to avoid him. The boy had even tried launching a few distance techniques, a poorly constructed fire jutsu and a strange variant that shot ice. He had not bothered to waste any clay trying to beat the boy there. He'd be able to do it better out in the open, where he had more freedom to move. The mount he had created was designed specifically for that purpose, quick lateral and vertical movements that allowed him to avoid being struck as well as attack normally. He glanced down again. His smile faded. A moment after the boy, a silver fox along with a man with similar colored hair appeared. His right eye zoomed in on the man, who looked different from before. His Hittite was up, and what Deidara saw made him frown. A Sharingan, he thought, but in only one eye. Who is this guy? He looked back towards the Kyuubi boy. He had leapt into the air, sailing across the ravine, and was now running along the cliff face, moving at a surprising speed considering the terrain. He would not catch up to Deidara anytime soon, however. This gave the Akatsuki members time. He reached into one of the side bags beneath his cloak and grabbed 2 bunches of his special clay. He still had quite a bit left, and once again he was happy that he had had the oversight to stock up on it before they had begun. Naruto! Roared Kakashi, stopping Suibuki by his side. He had encountered the fox on his way through. She had apparently slowed to meet him, for when he reached her, she became considerably harder to keep up with. Now that they had reached the open air, Kakashi spotted the blonde-tailing Deidara, running along the cliff face. Naruto glanced back at Kakashi. He then looked back up at the flying Akatsuki member, just barely catching sight of Gaara's dangling arm from the white bird's mouth. His boiling anger returned in a heartbeat, and he moved a bit faster. Seeing that trying to make him stop was not going to work, Kakashi tried a different tactic. Find some way to get in close. He's a long-range fighter, Naruto. He'll be weakest when you're closest. I'll try to slow him down. Naruto looked back again, and nodded to the man to show that he understood. A moment later, Naruto had leapt off the cliff, for a moment suspended in midair. In the next, the boy tucked his legs in, as if prepared to jump off the air itself. Which is precisely what he did. Naruto was suddenly, amazingly, flying. Or at least he looked to be. Kakashi's eyes widened when Naruto's legs shot out, and the boy sped upwards, instead of continuing to fall. The boy did this again, and again, and again, speeding steadily towards Deidara's level, who was staring at him with a similarly impressed look. Naruto had never so valued his training with Thrall in that moment. Wind elemental chakra, thought Kakashi, staring. He shook himself, returning his attention suddenly to Deidara. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and closed his left eye for a second, gathering chakra steadily into the whirling crimson eye. When he opened it, it had changed. No longer was it a solid black pupil, surrounded by 3 small comma-like marks. Now it was a solid black shuriken shape, which spun swiftly in place, as if in flight. He then began to focus, everything. He looked. He did not see, but he looked, as hard as he could, straight at Deidara. He gazed at a gaze that many thought was just a figure of speech. A look could literally kill. In the 2 years since Naruto had left, Kakashi had done more than just solo missions for his personal training. He had experimented, especially with the Sharingan that he had received from his long-departed friend and teammate, Obito. He had found that thinking of the previous owner of his eye had brought a peculiar pain to his eye, but then again, it always had. A pain that he had long attributed to merely his own guilt, which lay long buried underneath years of memory. A guilt, which while he acknowledged frequently in the form of his visits to the memorial, he had never dwelt too long upon otherwise. It had hurt too much, and so he simply did it in moderation. When Sasuke, Naruto and Sakura had become his genin students, the guilt had begun to lessen, and he had stopped frequenting the memorial of his friends. But it hadn't faded, and never truly would. Therefore, he had never really dwelled on that aching, deep pain, until a need born from Sasuke's defection and Naruto's disappearance had made him think. After years of constant pain, and everything he had ever known about the Uchiha clan, he had finally realized that there was something more to it. The pain was not natural. Perhaps it was guilt, but he began to think it was much more than that. Simply pouring chakra into the eye had never made a difference, but after months and months of training, Kakashi had begun to see another effect blossom from his constant use of the Sharingan. When focusing on that guilt he had held for so long, focusing so hard that it hurt beyond words, he could make his eye do something it had never done before. And at that moment, he was attempting to reproduce that effect. He focused all of his attention on Deidara, so much so that everything around him dissolved into dust, and it was just him and the Akatsuki member. He ran at an angle that allowed him to get a shot without risking Naruto being hit, and simply focused. The pain, deep-rooted, powerful, nearly endless, an old scab that he had never let fully heal, burned more and more with each passing moment, springing from an ache to a roaring fire. He did nothing to stop it, or waver from his course. He just continued to look. Naruto felt something rush by him. It was enormous, hot, and pinched his skin almost painfully, as if someone were trying to pull the flesh from his bones. He glanced back in the direction it had come from, spotting Kakashi, and saw that the man was staring straight up at Deidara, with a look in his eyes that slightly shocked the blonde, all things considering. In one eye, the obsidian black that was always exposed, Naruto saw an immense fury that seemed to make his eye glow like a stoked coal in a fire pit. But in the other, Naruto saw a pain as deep and bottomless as the sea. He saw a Sharingan eye that he had never seen before. He almost faltered in his next air grasp, but another wave of whatever Kakashi was doing sent his attention back to Deidara. The attack struck Deidara before he actually knew it was happening, but it did not have a lethal effect as intended. Deidara felt a sudden jolt in his stomach, followed by a fierce pain and a feeling as if his abdominal muscles were being put into his body. The feeling moved up his chest, straight in the center, making him cry out. Even his face began to hurt now, and his vision began to distort and blur. Everything became like a tunnel, suddenly, and his chin snapped to his chest, so that he was forced to see what exactly was happening to him. He gave a startled shout when he saw that his chest and the majority of his torso were being drawn into a small center point, a singularity which seemed to be drawing in every molecule, every atom, into that small, indefinable point, in the middle of his chest. It was as if his very existence was being pushed into a tiny spot, barely the size of a soldier pill. It was a strange and awful feeling, and he felt almost sick from it. The pain became suddenly unbearable, so he tried to pull himself away, by thrusting himself to the side with as much force as he could. It worked. The point and the pain shifted, moving across his chest and onto his left arm. He felt his bones being distorted again, and he continued to pull away. But this time much more pain came, and it reached a sudden head a second later, when the point reached its smallest size, and Deidara's arm was cut in two at the elbow. His left forearm fell away, landing a moment later in the dirty river below, while his entire elbow simply disappeared. Nearly a pound of flesh, muscle, and bone simply vanished, leaving Deidara with a missing arm for the second time in a week. Damn it! Deidara snarled, clutching the bleeding stump. He stepped back on his mount, gritting his teeth with the mind-numbing pain that would have made most men faint. He reached for a bottle tucked away in his cloak, but before he could move further, Naruto was upon him. He had forgotten the blonde in the heat of the moment, exactly as Kakashi had intended. Naruto swung his short sword at Deidara's head with the intent to remove it. But the older man ducked, so it clipped the top of his golden topknot. Deidara kicked Naruto in the leg, but it felt like kicking iron. The blonde didn't move an inch, and instead punched the Akatsuki member a dozen times in the chest, driving him back against the edge of the mount, so that he nearly toppled off. Naruto attempted a follow-through, but Deidara thrust something forwards, a small clay model in the shape of a spider. It grew to about the size of a basketball, its long, jointed legs latching themselves around Naruto's face. Deidara laughed. He ran forwards and kicked Naruto off the mount, while the blonde desperately tried to pry off the invader. He did not plan to detonate it, not yet. He didn't want to kill the poor boy, after all. Naruto fell, struggling to pull the spider off him, and when he did, he glanced up for the few seconds he had towards Deidara, and with a cry, hurtled his short sword swiftly upwards in a perfectly straight line. Then he managed to right himself just in time to crash into the river below. It was deep, so he didn't strike any rocks, but the distance more than made up for it. He struck the water with a painful slapping sound, left for a moment senseless by the fall. The sword flew, piercing the mount just below the neck, and soaring past Deidara's chin, barely missing him. It flew only a few feet higher before crashing, and becoming stuck, in the clay behind the Akatsuki member. Deidara, glancing with a sneer at the failed attack, removed the second bottle of Troll's blood potion he had tucked away in his cloak, and downed it with a disgusted look. But only Kakashi was able to witness its frightening effects this time. He stared numbly as Deidara's arm returned as if it had never left. What on earth is he? The Sharingan had removed an enormous amount of his chakra, far more so than ever before. When this was all over, should he survive, he would be spending a few days in the hospital, he knew. For more than physical reasons. Deidara glanced coldly down. The man who had removed his arm was staring up at him, his Sharingan eye whirling. What the hell was that? The blonde man raged. It was almost as strong as Itachi's, yeah. He reached into his cloak, removing more clay, making it into a pair of his favorite cranes. In a flash they were life-size, and both were flying at Kakashi in arrow paths. Instead of trying to dodge, which he knew he'd fail, Kakashi hurtled a pair of kunai at the birds, clipping one's neck off and missing the other. His eyes widened, and he prepared to leap, just as the bird reached him. And detonated in his face. No, Chio whispered, staring with fresh horror at the bloody mess on the cold, dirty cave floor. Sakura lay face down in a pool of her own blood, still as death and resembling it to a degree that made even battle-hardened women like Chio cringe in horror at the sight. Her last few moments were now frozen in Chio's mind. They would not stop playing before her eyes, even though it was now over, forever. She began to shake, without knowing it. How boring, Sasori said, calmly. She's already dead. I thought it might take a bit longer. She seemed to be a bit different from your average shinobi. It doesn't matter, however. He began moving his fingers, and the 3 puppets before him leapt onto Hikaru's ruined form. 3 more joined them, appearing from small holes in the scales, created by Sasori's subtle manipulations. 3 of them were clearly male, the largest of them being at least a foot taller than the rest, with a strange, and rather frightening, mask. The other 3 were clearly female, though all of them were dressed in the same black robes, with subtle differences. There was an emblem on each of their robes, a bat, a spider, a snake, a tiger and a black panther, as well as another unidentifiable marker on the biggest of them. They stood in a line atop Hikaru's shoulders, staring down at Chio and her puppets, and perhaps Sakura's body as well, with cold, silent, lifeless eyes and blank faces. Sasori moved his fingers again, making 3 of them jump from Hikaru's shoulders onto his back, and then onto his severed tail. From there, 2 leapt onto the separated end, and their arms split apart, as if they were going to attack, but from their opened hands a glowing green light flowed. The tail began to move, drawing slowly nearer towards the stump it had come from, where the third puppet stood, its arms out and glowing as well. Interesting, isn't it? They spent their entire lives wishing for immortality, granted by Hakar, and now they are the ones who seek to keep him alive. And imagine that instead of finding immortality in a god, they found it in a mere human. In their eyes, that would be the ultimate disgrace, you see. These people detest humans, or they did for quite a while. Chiyo spat. I could care less about your disgusting sense of art, Sasori. I did not come here for that. I came here to kill you. Her eyes briefly flickered towards Sakura as she said that, feeling a lance of guilt with her words. Her death came again, unbidden. Chiyo shuddered, wanting it to end. This girl had not been meant to die. She closed her eyes. Youth could not be wasted so much. Sakura, with all her talent, had been meant to live. So why had she died? She looked at Sasori. Because of him, he had ended her life. He and his disgusting puppets had killed her so brutally. She looked at Sakura's body again, and felt a melancholy unlike anything since her son had perished. It was a sudden shock, like awakening in a pool of ice-cold water. She had been so senseless to feeling all this time, that it took a young girl's death, from the leaf no less, to awaken her. Now, awash in feeling as she was, she could not help but find some terrible joy in it. It felt good to truly care once more about something, anything. Now she cares about this girl. This dead girl, once an enemy and now no longer anything but a lifeless, bloody corpse whose death would remain in Chiyo's mind until her last breath. She cared enough that she was going to make Sasori pay for one more thing, so dearly, making sure that he felt that payback long into the next life. She swallowed. So I shall do that, and I would be pleased if you didn't interrupt it with your boring descriptions of your disgusting and pointless artistry. Sasori scoffed. How rude. I was just giving you a little longer to plan your attack. You will need it, as Hakar is nearly finished with what repairs I can give him. Indeed, the trolls on his shoulders had already reconstructed half of the snake-like head, and the other half was coming even faster than before. Oddly, the largest of the trolls did not join in the repairing process. He just looked down, and though Chiyo could not see its eyes, she felt them, with a shudder. Even in death, this creature had such a presence it was staggering. And I take offense to your words, hag. Someone as old and wrinkly as you can feel nothing but jealousy when looking upon my art. I have captured what everyone has so longed for in their lives, a true constant, a stability that would never end. I make that feeling and hold it in every work of art I produce. How dare you, Grandma, he said this with particular impassion, so it felt almost mocking, call my art disgusting and pointless. Chiyo narrowed her eyes. Her teeth were clenched tightly. Sakura's eyes, wide and filled with pain, came into her thoughts again. Shall we begin again, then, Grandma? Sasori asked. Chiyo didn't answer. Her eyes drifted one final time to Sakura. Yes. Chiyo's children attacked with a sudden ferocity that puppets, in their nature, seemed incapable of. They attacked so swiftly that it was as if they had acted of their own accordance. The red-haired puppeteer countered by suddenly making Hakar move one of its giant side hands in a quick, diagonal slash. The puppets avoided it easily, one ducking beneath and one soaring over. But before they could reach Sasori, the three priests of Hakar leapt in their way, one clutching a glowing chakra shield, the other two with large swords appearing in their hands. The two reconstructing Hakar's head abandoned their half-finished task, deploying weapons of their own, one with a huge, wicked-looking claw on one hand, the other with a bladed whip, and careened towards Chiyo herself. Unlike Hakar, Chiyo Basama, I did bother to put poison on his priest's weapons, Sasori said, with that startling arrogance once more. A female priest, with the bat on her robe, thrust at Chiyo's head with her claw, while the male accompanying her, with the snake, swung the whip at her torso. Chiyo lifted one hand, and in perhaps the most foolish and desperate move she had ever made, grabbed the whip, preventing it from cutting into her stomach, and wrenched it up, using it and her own failing strength to block the claw from impaling her. She then pulled away, and as the two puppets moved in for a follow-up attack, she pulled back a sleeve of her robe, thrusting out her arm. The skin was remarkably smooth for someone her age, and perfectly unmarked. The reason became clear a moment later, when from the flesh sprung 4 flesh-colored plates, like the arms of a windmill. Both whip and claw struck a barrier made of solid chakra, and had bought Chiyo enough time to jump backwards, fleeing her pursuers and focusing once again on her own puppets. "That was stupid, old woman," Sasori said. "You just got poisoned." There was a small smile on his face, as pleasant as a frozen corpse. He was not surprised by her sudden ability, however. She was exactly the type of person who would modify her own body, adding weapons and tools usually reserved for puppets to it. But it delighted him, almost to see her use such tools. She was a true puppeteer, like him. Chiyo ignored him. She wrenched her hands back, and her children flew with them, breaking from the stalemate they had with the 3 priests from Hikaru's tail. They immediately returned to her, their black robes and wide bodies shielding Chiyo from Sasori's view. The apparently young man frowned. What was she planning now? Chiyo dug into her robes, pulling out a small single-shot medicine container, filled with a light blue liquid. She stuck the needle into her arm, and the contents flowed into it with a soft hissing. She returned the antidote to her robes, not wanting Sasori to get wind of it. Sakura, she decided, truly had been an amazing girl. Before they had entered the hideout, Sakura had pulled her aside and given her one of the 3 antidotes she had created from the amount of poison that Sasori had injected into Konkuro. She said that it would remain in the bloodstream for 3 minutes, and in that time would neutralize any poison that entered her system. That meant, starting now, she had exactly 3 minutes to kill Sasori. I'll end it now, she thought. She looked forwards, at her 2 puppets, their robes shredded, several of their weapons ruined, but still staring steadily forwards, at Sasori and him alone. "Forgive me," she said to them, softly. "I'm not strong enough to defeat him with just your aid. I must use them." They said nothing in return, of course. But Chiyo felt a sudden relief in her, as if they had told her it was all right. All that mattered, they said, was that Sasori was beaten. He had been left alive too long. She must use whatever was in her arsenal to stop him, to destroy him completely so it became as if he had never existed. "Use whatever you have to destroy him, Chiyo," they told her. Because it was too painful to see him like this. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching into her robes and retrieving a scroll that was perfectly white, so white that it seemed to glow, and felt almost warm to the touch, as if it was forged from light itself. There was but a single word written on it, in small, tidy black kanji. Chikamatsu. Sasori didn't see what she was doing. So he decided to make her show him. With a few flicks of his fingers, 5 of his 7 puppets launched an attack on Chiyo and her own puppets. Hikaru and the big Hitokugutsu hung back, watching in apparent silent appraisal. Sasori decided that he would kill Chiyo in the old-fashioned way. He didn't want to repeat death, using Hikaru's disease. And it would be much more fun, he decided, to see his grandmother get butchered by half a dozen puppets, and see her body parts flung all over the place as they tore her to pieces. Maybe, he decided, he wouldn't make her into a puppet. She was too annoying, and he didn't want to see her face. Maybe he'd just cut her up and burn what was left of her body, so he'd never have to look at that annoying face again. It'd be easy, too. Her body was no doubt weakened from the poison, and would continue to deteriorate until she was at his utter mercy. His smile became a little cruel, showing a hint of emotion for the second time. Chiyo unfurled the scroll, revealing gradually 10 drawn black diamonds filled with a number of symbols, and watching as Hikaru's priests charged towards her, drawing weapons of all manners from their persons. A huge spear, a wicked-looking hammer, a pair of long blades, the claws and the whip, all glinting with the black poison that Sasori so loved. She took a deep breath, and for the final time before she ended Sasori's miserable life, She glanced over towards Sakura's body, to see the final reminder of her failure as a shinobi and a person, before she died. But the girl was gone, and only a pool of drying blood remained. And just as she realized that, Sasori did too. There was but a hint of movement at his side, so slight and quick that he registered it a second too late, when a blood-covered fist struck his stomach, making an oddly hollow, almost wooden sound, followed by a violent cracking. A pulse of chakra strong enough to crumple steel then slammed into him, and he pitched forwards in the second before he flew backwards, meeting the eyes of his attacker. They were green, and stared at him above bloody tear tracks, and were filled with fury unclouded by pain or delirium. Then the world blurred and spun, writing itself in a white, dizzying flash when he slammed with stone-breaking force into the wall of the cave. Haruno Sakura stood up straight, as Sasori's puppets crumpled to the ground from the sudden loss of the chakra strings controlling them. She looked awful. Her body was covered in blood, staining her skin red and making her hair matted and sticky. The blood vessels in her eyes had burst, filling the whites with red. There were trails of blood from her nose and eyes that looked like the ghastly face paint of some foreign tribe. One arm hung limply by her side, and the other was up and clenched into a tight, bloody fist. She looked like a demon, with that face and those eyes staring with unbridled hate at Sasori, as he lay in a pile of broken rock by the wall. But when she turned to Chiyo, her face changed. She gave the tired old woman a confident and kind smile, if only for a moment, that reminded her of the smile Chiyo herself had given the girl just before their first attack. She was suddenly so happy to see the girl that she wanted to hug her and laugh with joy and relief at her survival. Such a sudden swelling of emotion nearly dazzled her, so she merely stared, in awe and elation, at Sakura's apparent resurrection. It hit her, then, with the same force that Sakura's fist had hit Sasori, Nuha Sayu. She hadn't released the technique, she suddenly realized. Did she destroy the disease as it infected her, and use the chance to spring a trap on Sasori? Sasori stared. He couldn't believe it. That wasn't possible. Corrupted blood was completely fatal to any who struck it. And even if this girl had somehow managed to survive the damage it had done, she had lost enough blood to kill her. He tried to rise, but found his body unsteady and hard to move. The punch had done a lot of damage, he realized. Chiyo Basama, Sakura said, suddenly. It was a wonder to hear her voice. That's not Sasori's real body. Chiyo quashed her emotion as swiftly as an unneeded match. What? When I hit him, I hit something hard, like the puppet he was in before. I don't think that's him either. It might be a puppet look-alike or something, but I know that's not Sasori, or else he wouldn't have survived that hit. A brief observation of the fallen man made Chiyo immediately agree. The damage done to the rock wall was so severe that no normal person could have gotten up after causing it. In fact, no normal person should have been able to cause it. It would have reduced them to a bloody pulp long before that amount of rock was shattered, and Sasori looked almost completely intact. However, what bothered her was the fact that Sakura's hit hadn't completely annihilated the puppet that looked like her grandson. It had to be that either its body was exceptionally tougher than the others, or that Sakura had been severely weakened. How did you survive? Sasori asked. That isn't possible. I flushed out the disease. It doesn't seem to be able to survive long in air, or this entire room would have been infected already. I forced out as much blood as possible, and used my chakra to kill the remaining virus particles in my body, and then boosted my blood cell creation rate. She spat red saliva onto the ground. You obviously don't know your own creation that well. Since I had to force the blood out of my body, it's obviously not a natural occurrence, and because you didn't comment, you obviously have never seen it kill someone. She smirked coldly. You obviously don't know your own toys very well, huh? Sasori stared at the girl, narrowing his eyes. What an annoying girl she was. She even had the gall to make fun of him like that. She wasn't going to get away so easily. Neither of them would. He decided that he'd have to take care of this himself. He'd make sure that this girl didn't survive another round. He stood straight up, and reached for the collar of his cloak, beginning to undo it. You're half right, girl. This body isn't made of flesh and bone. It is, however, my. Stop. Sasori stopped. He glanced around, unsure if the word had been spoken aloud or in his mind. This fight is over. You, he whispered aloud. What do you want? I'm telling you to leave. This fight will not continue. Act like a shinobi, Sasori, not a samurai. You're overconfident, and as that girl has proven, it will cost you dearly if you continue this fight. You are still a member of Akatsuki, and hence, you still have a job to do. You can't die just yet, Sasori. Remember what I told you. Sasori narrowed his eyes at the invisible specter, lowering his hand. He stood for a moment in complete silence, drawing two mystified looks from Chiyo and Sakura. He then sighed heavily, extending both hands. Fine, I guess I have to forego the more interesting play at this point. It seems I have other things to do, Chiyo-ba, Leaf Girl. I'm sorry that I cannot stay. We'll have to finish this show another time. His fingers began moving, and the 6 priests suddenly leapt to their feet, and abandoned their attack on Chiyo. They fled immediately to where the giant one stood, atop the fallen blood god's back, forming a rough circle around him. The big one then stretched out his arms, while the others placed their hands on Hakar's body. The scales began to shift around the big puppet, and something emerged beneath him, rising up and lifting him above all the rest. It was a giant idol of a winged snake, carved crudely from a light-colored wood, and covered head to tail in explosive notes. A door on the big puppet's chest suddenly opened, as did plates on its arms and legs and head, all revealing explosive notes of varying sizes and intensities. The big puppet then began to shake, for no apparent reason. To Sakura, it was laughing. I'm sorry we couldn't finish this, Chiyo-ba, Sasori said, in a soft lament. Maybe next time. Chiyo stared one last time at Sasori, her eyes wide. He was giving her a pleasant smile, in structure like those he used to give her, but in spirit more horrible than ever before. She gazed at the ghastly perversion of a man he had become, and realized for the last time that Sakura was right. This man was but a puppet. This was not her grandson. Her grandson was a man of 35, with hair like his father's and a smile like his mother's. He was a dutiful, kind and loyal man who fought for his village with everything he had, to avenge the deaths of his parents as well as to keep the spirit of the village alive. That was what her grandson should have been. But this thing before her now looked as a boy of 15, with cold, glossy eyes and an emotionless smile. This was some cruel demon. He had merely taken the face of her grandson, nothing more. That was it. Her grandson was already dead. He had been dead for 20 years. So when Sasori vanished in a flicker of movement, she did not lament his departure. Nor did she look forward to the next meeting, where she might finally destroy the impostor who had taken her grandson's form. Because she knew that that time would never come. Next time, she whispered softly. I guess you truly don't understand, do you? No, he didn't, she realized. He never did. He never would. That was his crippling, horrible weakness. He would never understand life or death, because he could experience neither. He was not truly alive, just as he was not truly dead. God, what a fool she was. Sakura was suddenly in front of her, shouting at her that they needed to leave. She looked into the girl's eyes, which despite being covered in blood, glittered with a beautiful inner fire. They longed for life, as Chiyo once had. They longed for everything Sakura had not yet experienced. This girl was in the prime of her life, the true prime, not just physical, but the prime when life still has so much to give a person. A time Sasori had never had. It had been taken from him, or perhaps he had squandered it himself. And that was true beauty, true art, that passion for life that Chiyo would not let end here. It was something that no human hands could capture or create. But I tried, she thought, softly. And I failed. Forgive me, my son, my daughter, forgive me for I could not give you back that life that was so cruelly stolen. I was just like him. I didn't understand either. Not until now. She smiled at Sakura, glad that she could see that face full of life again. It was the most beautiful thing in the world. She unfurled the gleaming white scroll, labeled Chikamatsu, roaring into the air as the explosive notes on Hikaru's biggest priest and the idol he stood upon ignited, and exploded. The air was filled with a bright, shining light, and then came sound, all the sound in the world, it seemed, compressed into a single burst. And then there was nothing. Ah, youth, underscore. Kakashi was thrown backwards by the explosion. At the very last moment, he had jumped back with all his power, creating a vast distance between him and the fatal range of the explosion. But the force knocked him back even farther, causing him to crash into the side of the cliff, feeling the rocks beneath him hammer into his bones and pierce his skin. The world twirled and spun, making him unable to move for a short while. In that time, Deidara put some distance between him and the silver-haired man, and he began searching the waters for Naruto. Yet, the blonde had effectively vanished. His eyepiece whirred and spun, seeking out any possible place for the blonde to hide. There was none. He cursed, reaching up and pressing a button on the side. The view changed. Everything turned a hazy red, making it nearly difficult to distinguish one thing from another. It was a thermal sensor. He rarely used it, as he never usually gave so much trouble to an offending shinobi. But it revealed nothing. The blonde was gone, as if he had never been. He looked down at Kakashi again. The silver-haired man was staring back at him, but had covered his eye again. Deidara smirked triumphantly. Obviously, it was too draining for him to continue using. He decided to kill the man as swiftly as he could. Things left unfinished nearly always came back to bite. He began molding another model, guiding his bird lower, towards Kakashi. He'd make it a big one, so this guy didn't have any chance of dodging. He looked at Kakashi again. The man hadn't moved, and was continuing to glare up at him, the silver fox standing almost complacently by his side. Now Deidara was confused. Why was this man not trying to attack, or even escape? He frowned, his body tensing. A trap, maybe. Was he waiting for something? He looked around below, searching again for any sign of the wayward blonde boy. Then, there was a sudden prickling in the back of his neck, and he felt his cloak ruffle, even though there was no wind blowing. He whipped around. Naruto was there, half sunk in a dark pool that was Deidara's own shadow, clutching a glowing, spinning sphere of chakra in his palm. His eyes were narrowed in deadly determination, and sprung forwards, his hand pulling back, mouth opening in a loud battle cry. Rasengan. Deidara dropped the model he was holding, and thrust out his hand. It struck right atop Naruto's outthrust palm, the mouth engulfing the sphere of chakra in a single impressive bite, and quenching it as swiftly as a candle flame. He locked hands with the blonde, as Naruto's eyes widened and the sound died in his throat. Deidara then grabbed him by the scruff of his jacket, tasting the odd leather in his hand-mouth. He grinned triumphantly. "Got you, yeah," he said, sneering. "You're an odd one, aren't you? I didn't expect a Jinchuriki to be like you at all. They're supposed to be loathsome creatures that hate people and are hated by everyone." The other two were, at least, yeah. Naruto struggled to pull away, but Deidara had an impressive grip for someone so slight. He never once, however, broke eye contact with the man. Deidara was a little unnerved by the boy's eyes, they were so powerful and demanding. They were the eyes of a true warrior. They reminded him strangely of the Okashira in that intensity, and that unnerved him even more. So he decided to end it right then. He wrenched Naruto's hand downward, and then lifted him off his feet. He released his grip on Naruto's hand for a moment, and then grabbed him again on the forearm, hissing into the blonde's ear, "I hope you weren't using this arm, yeah. It's going to become my art." But in that very second, with the words just leaving his lips, a terrible, fiery pain exploded within his stomach, making him release all the holds on Naruto's body. He fell back, stunned, glancing down to see the hilt of Naruto's sword sticking from the side of his stomach, buried so deep that no hint of steel could be seen. The blade lanced up straight through his innards, cutting through muscle and small intestine, emerging with a flood of blood from the man's lower back. The wound was worse than losing an arm, due to the nerves and organs, and so even Deidara found himself unable to bear the pain. But his cry was cut short by a geyser of choking blood leaping into his throat, making him gag and throw it up all over his mouth and cloak. Added to this was Naruto's sudden, violent kick, which struck him in the face and sent him careening off the mottled bird. He fell, perhaps 4 or so dozen feet, crashing through the canopy of a tree and then a series of branches, each one cracking beneath his weight but damaging him equally. He finally hit the ground, which was thankfully soft, nearly passing out as he did, as whatever air remained in his lungs was violently forced out. Deidara's mount fell, no longer controlled by its master. Naruto immediately summoned a clone, which grabbed Gaara's body as it tumbled from the creature's mouth. Both of them then air grasped down, landing neatly on the branches of a particularly tall tree. Kakashi watched them fall. He silently praised Naruto, leaping across the gorge and scaling the wall in great bounds, Suwabuki speeding ahead of him almost immediately. When they reached the trees above, Suwabuki led him to Naruto's tree. Kakashi appeared on the branch a few seconds later, making only 2 jumps to get there. The blonde was staring at Gaara, who lay limp in his hands. The Cage's eyes were closed, peacefully. But his face was frozen in a mask that Kakashi knew would rend Naruto's heart. It was a look of utter agony, not from pain, but from the most awful feeling that someone like Naruto could feel. Loneliness. Naruto stared down at Gaara with sad, soft eyes. He felt numb. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He couldn't be dead. Not now. Not when life was beginning to make sense to him. When it was beginning to mean something. Tears long thought dried came to his eyes, but he did nothing to push them away. Kakashi-sensei, he said, softly. Kakashi said, look after Gaara, for me, would you? Fine, thanks. Naruto bounded from the tree, disappearing into the dark forest beneath. Deidara managed to stand. Everything was dizzy and his vision was clouded. This was the first time he had been on the verge of death for a long time, he realized. Not since the initiation rite, that is. But even then, he didn't remember it being like this. Damn that brat, he thought. How did he do that? That sword was behind him, out of his reach. How did he? He barely heard those thoughts, the pain coming in surging waves, each one leaving him more fatigued, closer to unconsciousness. He had managed to get the sword out, at least. But it didn't make sense. How had the brat called the blade to him? Was it like Kisami's sword, bound to his will and chakra source? Partly. Though he did not know it, the wound, while dealt by Naruto, had been Mekatork's work in reality. For on the hilt of the blade, as well as Naruto's wrist, there was a new device, just for Naruto. The High Tinker had come up with the plans for it just after Naruto had left him, years ago. He had left it aside, to focus on rebuilding Nomergon, but had returned to it every so often, when a minute became free. It consisted of 2 parts, a wristwatch-like device that Naruto possessed, and a smaller device that was attached to the end of his sword. It formed a small connection between Naruto and the blade, a small chakra string, which could never be cut, and allowed Naruto to control the weapon from afar to a certain degree. He could draw it to him from great distances, or control its movement in flight. He had had little time to experiment with it, but that had not truly mattered. Naruto was the type to learn as he went into battle, and so far it had been a splendid success. But Deidara did not know this, and hence cursed and raged and wondered how the blonde had gotten the jump on him. He had never been so injured before in his life. And God, how he hated that brat. Why isn't that potion working? He thought. The troll's blood potion was supposed to have continual effects for up to an hour. He should be healing at this point. The damage was enormous, however, and thus it probably had a lot to regenerate. He bit back a snarl in his throat, gripping his wounded stomach. He'd have to speed it up then. That boy would probably be here soon. He dug for some clay in his cloak, letting a hand-mouth devour it. He then placed it over his wound. Doden. Tsuchidegeki. Then the ground exploded beneath him, and despite the awful pain it brought, He was forced to leap into the trees, landing unsteadily on a branch. He glanced down. Naruto stood there, his palm planted in the earth. He was glaring up at Deidara with a renewed bestial rage. He leapt after the man, making seals as he went. Raiden. Rekusa. A bolt of lightning erupted from Naruto's fingertips, streaking towards Deidara. The man avoided it by jumping off his perch, and falling to the ground, right next to his fallen mount. He glanced at it. The lightning struck the tree he had once been standing on, causing little damage. But Naruto was already reorganizing his attack, and had propelled himself downwards with a burst of air, both hands drawn back, each one clutching a glowing sphere of chakra. Deidara danced behind the tree. Naruto pursued in a blink, appearing behind the man before Deidara could react. Deidara spun, but could barely get off a shout before both spiraling spheres slammed into his back in an explosion of light and power. Rasengan. The chakra tore into Deidara's flesh, and propelled him forwards, into the tree and through it too. The chakra is a bit like 1,000 kunai striking a single place, and sends waves more of it through Deidara's body, cutting into everything within. The force was so strong that even after flying through the tree, he continued for a few more yards, skidding across the ground, rolling, and finally stopping as the tree struck the ground behind him with a rumbling boom. Deidara lay still. Naruto strode towards the fallen body. He drew a kunai as he did, his teeth biting down so hard they looked at risk of cracking. He stopped behind the man, breathing heavily, staring down at Deidara, his hand up and ready to attack. This man would die. He continued to stare, waiting, almost praying, for the man to move again. But he did not. Deidara was dead, and for one fierce moment, Naruto felt a surge of delight in seeing the man's fallen body, knowing that he had caused it. Knowing that he had killed this man. It was an awful, disgusting, violent feeling, and yet it felt so delightful and so justified that Naruto reveled in it. Naruto-kun. Naruto turned to the voice, and the feeling passed. From the trees emerged Hinata, Kiba, Shino and Kurenai, all looking bruised and battle-worn, but alive and apparently well. Hinata's face was a mask of relief, which Naruto felt a little glad to see, but more sad. But he did not even bother trying to smile, that was too hard. It was over, but Gaara was still gone. You guys all right? Kakashi appeared a moment later as well, the clone of Naruto carrying Gaara's limp form trailing sadly behind him. Hinata gasped at the sight, Shino froze, and Kiba stared in an open mixture of horror and rage. Hey, is he? The question was rather unnecessary, and even Kiba knew it. From the look on Naruto's face, the truth could not be plainer. The mission had failed. Kiba visibly sunk, his face sagging, his eyes downcast. Akamaru whimpered, nuzzling his partner's leg. Shino lowered his head, and pushed his glasses closer to his face, as if to further hide the pain within them. Hinata closed her eyes, trying to stop the tears that would flow, not only from seeing Gaara's silent body, but also from seeing the agony on Naruto's face. Naruto's friend suddenly became awash with feelings of such despair that it was almost staggering. Hinata began openly crying, silently, as she stared at Naruto, who looked sadder than all of them, at least in his eyes. His presence had the same effect. No matter what emotion he felt, if he were optimistic and cheerful, he would inspire others to be as well, but if he was as depressed as now, then so were they. There's nothing more we can do, Kakashi said, breaking the soft, mournful, dreadful silence. We'd best get to Sakura and Chio, they may need our help. Kurenai nodded. She masked her own despair, and nodded to her students. You heard him. We'll go now. What about him? Shino asked. He nodded to Deidara's ruined form. He's right, said Kakashi. Even though it's only a corpse, there's a lot of information we can get from it. We should bring it with us. Those in Konoha will be able to do something with it. Though this is a monumental failure, we can perhaps yet snatch victory from it. Kakashi sighed, as if not truly believing his own words. It will tell us a lot about Akatsuki, and that will be of great aid to us in the future. We'll be able to prevent, He glanced at Naruto, this from happening again. Naruto caught the look, and nodded softly. He made a seal, softly whispering a few words under his breath. 2 clones appeared, and with a wave he directed them to pick up their new cargo. As they bent down to pull him up, there was a sudden movement, more than a death twitch, and Deidara's head suddenly spun completely around so that it stared up at them with one wide eye and a leering, evil smile. Yeah right, here's the last piece, bastards. Enjoy. He gave a single, horrifying laugh, as his body suddenly began to swell up, becoming grotesquely huge in only a few seconds. Kakashi roared an order to run, realizing what the man was about to do. They ran. Naruto could have easily outstripped them all, yet he hung back, behind all of them, perhaps to see that they all survived, and perhaps to keep an eye on his precious cargo, Gaara's body. He gave a final glance back, where Deidara had become something like a gargantuan balloon animal, smiling and laughing in the most horrible way. Naruto wanted nothing more than for that laughter to end. We're not going to make it, Kakashi thought. He put on a burst of speed, just as a white-hot blast of wind, followed by an ear-splitting boom, erupted behind him. He glanced back, and as the explosion rushed towards them, realized that it would completely consume them, killing them all without fail. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto, everyone. Get into a circle. The voice hit them from the front, and a moment later, their saviors came into sight. Sakura, soaked from head to toe in dried blood, and Chiyo, surrounded by 10 white-robed figures, stood before them. They immediately obeyed, streaking towards the small group as the white-robed figures spread out in a large circle to accommodate them. When they were all within the circle, Chiyo raised her hands, the figures leapt in front of them, forming a long, 10-man wall. They clasped their hands together before them, as if about to pray, as long, wing-like blades erupted from their backs, springing straight up. At that same moment, the explosion hit them. But nothing happened. No flames consumed them, boiled their skin or tore them to pieces. The flames parted, as a crowd of subjects does to an emperor. They stood, shocked, as the flames surrounded their small party, not burning or injuring or even singing a single hair on their heads. Chiyo stood at the head of them, laughing with everything she had left. It was not a joyful sound, or a humorous one. It sounded almost sad, but nobody would find the meaning behind that laughter. Save two perhaps, but they would never speak it aloud. It was her final mark on this world. Yes, she knew it now. She knew what had to be done. Youth was something to be treasured in this world. And she would be damn sure that those that deserved to cherish it did. That would be her final gift. Yes, they would have been proud of that. Even if it only meant saving one life, instead of 3.